the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome. It's great to be back. It's Monday, the 10th of March now, and I'm with you for the next 3 hours. So coming up at midnight, as ever, it is the phone-in hour. The only one. Don't forget, this is the only chance you get to talk back. And what I want to talk to you about is this sentencing that everyone, I know this feels like it's late to the party, but I wanted to wait until there was something else to say about it. Sentencing chief defends, in inverted commas, two-tier justice plan, saying critics are wrong to say that minorities will get preferential treatment and threatening ministers with legal action. This is the head of the Sentencing Council. Now, the Sentencing Council slightly are autonomous from the rest of the judiciary. They get to sort of talk about sentencing and what's right in sentencing, what's wrong in sentencing, and often we think that sentencing is far too low, don't we, in this country for certain crimes. But this whole row was broken up over the pre-sentencing reports. Now, pre-sentencing reports are nothing new. They have always been around. A defence attorney can ask for a pre-sentencing report if there are what they would term mitigating circumstances. And this is where the mitigation comes in, usually. A bad childhood, drugs, being abused, leading to criminal behaviour, all of these things that they think have a part of the crime, that they become part of the crime. Now, what has been suggested now is that automatically anybody who is female, anybody who is trans, anybody who is from a religious minority or an ethnic minority will, as a matter of course, my understanding is, get one of these pre-sentencing reports, which could lead to them getting more favourable sentencing than people who don't fit into those categories, white men, and that's about it really, who don't fit into those categories. So this is now being called the new two-tier, and a lot of people would suggest that we already have a two-tier system. We've always had a multi-tiered system. Let's be honest, the rich get off, the poor don't. That is already a two-tier system as far as I'm concerned. The rich can get all the right attorneys, they can get right lawyers, they can spend all the money, they get off. They don't do time. If you're a Labour MP, it seems that you don't really do time either. So we already are aware that there is a very... But justice in this country is not blind and it is not balanced. We know that. So I want to know if you think that this really, putting it down in writing now and suggesting that people from those groups that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get preferential treatment, but the likelihood is that they might. And that isn't justice. Justice should be blind, shouldn't it? Or does somebody's background really have an influence on what they turn out to be? And you'd be pretty nuts not to think that it does, right? Somebody who's from a very wealthy family, who's had nothing but the best, less likely to end up in a criminal situation. Doesn't mean that they don't, but it means that they're less likely to. So what's wrong with a pre-sentencing report? What's wrong with mitigation? Or maybe you think we're just going too far down the road now about this two-tier justice system. I'd love to hear your view on this. Give me a call, 0344 499 1000. And if we are to have pre-sentencing reports, maybe we should just have them for everybody, as a matter of course, because there'll be plenty of young white men that are in prison who are there because their background was pretty ropey. Maybe they had an abusive father. Maybe they got into drugs because they were not educated well enough at school. We know that white boys are falling behind almost every other category of pupil in the education system. So, but do you think that any mitigation should be taken into account, or does it depend on the crime? You can message me as well, put the word talk and then your message to 87222. Right, so that's the phone in at midnight. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say to that. I'm prepared to have my mind changed on that, but I do think a different background does have a different outcome. It just does. Right, coming up as well, between 11 and 12, we have the fabulous Vincent Moss in the studio, former political editor, who's going to be going through Tuesday's newspapers. Caroline Faraday joins us from LA, and Alex next Three Lions Irons will also be chatting through some of the football and the sport at the weekend. But first, Justin Trudeau is now just interim PM. He is stepping down. And a man called Mark Carney is now the Prime Minister for Canada. And he's also interim, if you like, because there's got to be an election at some point before October. But the Liberal Party have voted for Mark Carney overwhelmingly. 85.9, I think, % of the vote went to Mark Carney. Now, you know the name Mark Carney. You know you do. You're scratching your head. He was the Bank of England governor. He was the guy that was in charge of the Bank of England during Brexit. So he doesn't have any political experience, but that these days doesn't seem to be a requirement of many heads of state. But he certainly has economic kudos, right? He certainly knows what he's talking about when it comes to economies and what makes them work and what makes them doesn't work. But is he tough enough to stand up to Donald Trump, given all of the issues that are going on with Canada and the US at the moment? And is Trump going to insist on calling Mark Carney Governor Mark Carney? Because when he calls him Governor Trudeau, it's just rude, isn't it? But what's going to happen now? So I wanted to find out. So we're talking now to Jen Hassam, who's Executive Director at the Broadbent Institute in Canada. It's an independent Canadian think tank. Thank you so much for joining me, Jen. So you've got Mark Carney. I quite liked him when he was here. I thought he did a great job. There's some division there, but he's got no political experience. Is that going to be a problem?
That's right. So he's an economist, former governor of the Bank of Canada. Folks in England would also know him as the former governor of the Bank of England. And he's been a top executive at Goldman Sachs, Brookfield Asset Management. And Canadians want change. They do not want Justin Trudeau to be the prime minister. And what we have seen is that what was going to be a walk-away race with the Conservatives winning a very clear majority has now tightened. So polls in Canada are showing that Canadians are open to Mark Carney's message.
Is he the right man at the right time, given what's going on with Trump and the tariffs on again, off again? Mark Carney is suggesting that what Trump really wants to do is destroy the economy so that they can easily make Canada the 51st state.
Well, I think this is a really just a completely changing the game kind of intervention that Trump has made in the Canadian mind. What people were thinking about going into the election is the cost of housing was increasing in Canada, the cost of groceries. It's increasingly unaffordable to live. And they were looking for conservative solutions to this. But with Trump starting to say, we're looking at creating economic damage to Canada, and they are our largest trading partner, we have an integrated economy, people are thinking about now and are open to Mark Carney because of his economic experience. But is that really the way to combat rising populist conservative sentiment, is to have someone who is known for their international economic chops? So only the Canadian electorate will be the decision maker of that. And it's going to be a really, really interesting election that we all expect to be called within the next week or so.
What is interesting, though, isn't it, just looking at the rising of that conservative or right-leaning policies, a lot of Canadians now are watching that in real time happen in the US and are probably thinking, oh, maybe that's not what we actually want, you know. I mean, maybe that sort of behaviour, and it would be easy to link it, right, is not something that we want. And also the suggestion that Pierre, is it, say his other name.
Polyev, yeah.
Thank you, because it's I've got it, but it's difficult to say. That he is friends with Trump, and maybe they're looking at that and going, that's not a safe bet.
Well, yeah, and I think Pierre Poilievre has made the smart choice to rebrand his campaign from Axe the Tax to Canada First. And so you won't see Pierre Poilievre without a Canadian flag behind him at the podium. But certainly my friends and neighbors that maybe admired Trump in the past have now taken down their Trump flags or their MAGA hats because of what Trump is doing to Canada. Just imagine, especially your listeners late at night, to make this real for you. Canadians are going day in, day out into jobs, and we have an integrated economy. So what's happening is their managers are saying, if these tariffs go through, we might need to slow down production. There might need to be layoffs. And this is so worrisome. So for example, during the trucker convoy, when our one border bridge was shut down for 2 days, it meant that whole car factories where I live, were shut down for 2 weeks because the auto parts weren't able to move back and across the border. For a car to be made in Canada and to be completed, those parts and the car itself may have passed through the border up to 8 times before being ready for sale. And that's cars, but it's also everything from, if you can believe it, pork. So whole piglets are shipped back and forth, and where they are finished and processed into hams can change across the border. It's very integrated. And so one way for your listeners to think about it is you can't unscramble an egg. That's what Trump is trying to do, is trying to separate it after it's been all blended. And so on both sides of the border, this is what the regular average Canadians and Americans who work in this industry are facing when they go to work. Am I going to have a job next week? Am I going to be laid off? And does the company have a long-term plan in order to get these component parts or component pieces so that can be wholly shaped on one side and not subjected to tariffs of going back and forth?
Well, before we look at what Canada's doing with those tariffs, I just wanted to hit upon Justin Trudeau, because he was so unpopular that he was forced to resign. But in recent weeks, he seems to have won back a lot of respect from Canadians. He hasn't let Donald Trump walk all over him. Quite the opposite. He's come forward as a real leader again.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. And I haven't been a fan of Trudeau, but it is the case. Who doesn't like seeing, in a time of crisis, your national political leaders standing up and standing firm? And I think there's a lot of Canadians, and you see this, that Canada is continuing with the retaliatory tariffs. And in fact, the state of Ontario today, the province of Ontario, issued a 25% levy on US-bound electricity that we trade and export to the United States. So those consumers, their electrical bills are going to go up by 25%. And the thinking here in Canada is that if we hit hard, stand firm, then we'll find a solution and be able to broker a solution through this kind of leverage, so that every single day we're not exposed to, are there going to be tariffs? Aren't there going to be tariffs? Which industries are affected? Which ones are not? And finally resolve this for once and for all, and hopefully go back to normal.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? That with Donald Trump, the uncertainty is what breaks markets, right? It's what collapses stock markets as well. But it is interesting to me that he came back within 2 days and said, all right, we're going to pause the tariffs again. And Canada just basically said, look, we can't live like this. Right, we are going to stick with our tariffs, and we're going to stand up to you. The thing is, with Trump's particular personality type, don't you have to give him a way out? He can't lose to Canada, because then he's never going to back down.
Yeah, and I think these are the kinds of strategies and game playing that Canada is thinking through, and that I have no doubt Americans are also, who are trade negotiators, are also thinking through, that there does need to, at the end, come to terms and come to an agreement, because our economies are so integrated. $1.3 trillion crosses our borders each and every day. There are whole oil refineries that depend on Canadian crude oil that would shut down completely. Same with car manufacturing. Almost every industry is touched by each other on both sides of the border. And that's why we've been economically strong for so long. We have natural resources, and Americans have processing plants. This just makes sense.
The other interesting thing, though, is that a lot of Canadians, and I think it's spilled out across the world, to be honest, I've joined in support of Canada, is just not buying American goods. And what's going to be interesting is that even if the tariffs are sorted out, if Canadians are anything like British people, we've got long memories, right? We don't like it. We don't like being bullied. We don't like, so we're going, no, I'm not going to buy, I'm not going to deal with Amazon. I'm not going to buy that American product. I've seen all over things like TikTok and Instagram, all these Canadians saying, nah, I will never go back to buying American. So Trump has already, in a sense, already created some real damage to that marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a damage to these relationships. But for the most part, the Canadians I know and talk to, and just my friends and family, everyone on social media, you also see a recognition that this is Trump himself. This isn't Americans.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think Americans voted for this.
No.
Americans voted for the reshoring of really good union jobs back in America. And the way to do that was to create trade barriers and promote domestic manufacturing when it comes to China, or when it comes to things that are overseas. It's not this kind of goods in exchange, because at the end of the day, what are we going to do with the crude oil that we export? It needs to be refined, and you can't just create an oil well out of nowhere, out of thin air within a month in order to replace that. And the same goes for almost every natural resource. It doesn't make a whole lot of economic sense. So, you know, the hope here is that people do come to their senses, and that there's a lot of leverage occurring right now that will push people into coming to their senses as soon as possible.
But Mark Carney, he's looking at the extension of those pipelines. He's looking at different markets, and is saying things like, we can no longer trust this. We can't put all our, excuse the Americanism here, we can't put all our eggs in one basket. They haven't got any eggs in America, but you know, we can't put all our eggs in one basket. We need to diversify. We need to diversify our marketplaces. We need to be closer to Europe. I mean, even we need to be selling to China. China desperately want Canada's oil. So I'm just wondering if the damage is too late, even though the American people didn't ask for this. Certainly the Canadian people didn't ask for this, right? And he's mistaken your politeness for weakness, big mistake. And you know, Mark Carney's saying, well, we're going to be looking at different markets now. We have to. We can't rely on this relationship anymore. It's become toxic.
Yeah, but I think those aren't things necessarily that we're seeing the Prime Minister speak to or begin to have photo ops on. People are really focused on trying to rebuild trust with our American neighbors and friends. We've been allies for so long. But yes, everyone in the policy sector in Canada is talking about diversifying our markets, is looking towards England, towards the UK, and Eurozone. People are looking at Latin America and the Western Hemisphere. So is there a way that we can have a closer trade relationship with Mexico and a closer relationship with Brazil, Chile? These are questions that Canadians are asking themselves. And I think that these discussions are happening, but first and foremost is trying to rebuild that relationship with our closest friend and neighbor. But yes, things can change on a dime. It's very unpredictable.
I mean, that's the issue, though, isn't it? With with Canada saying, well, no, I'm sorry, we're keeping our tariffs in place, because it could be tomorrow, it could be next week, it could be double it could be, you know, we don't know what's happening. With Mark Carney, do you see him being a global player in the way that Trudeau stepped forward with Ukraine, with NATO, with the Eurozone, meeting up and having talks, strategic talks about, you know, how to go it alone without America? I mean, Trudeau was visible, right? He was there. He was standing with his allies. Is Mark Carney going to do the same, do we think?
I do. I think it is going to be the same. And I don't know if this is the case, you know, right now in your political space, but at the same time that I think Trudeau was very active internationally, and in fact, lauded in the international press. Back home, there were many problems that didn't get the attention that was needed. So, for example, on housing and on inflation, cost of living, cost of groceries, these were things that, like, for better or worse, became neglected. And so I certainly hope that if Carney does a similar kind of taking up a lot of space on the international circuit, that there's also attention given to what's happening domestically, because that was part of Trudeau's downfall.
And how you said at the very beginning, you think that the election will happen sooner rather than later. When do you think that will be called? And is that in Carney's best interest? Is that in the Liberals' best interest to be straight away after a new leader was put in place?
Well, I mean, there's no, there's nothing certain in Canadian politics. Canadian voters are switchers. We don't have the same kind of levels of subscription to a political party like in the United States. So things can dramatically happen and change in elections. It can be really exciting, and our election terms are quite small, sometimes 30 days, 40 days tops.
Wow.
So, yes. It's
wow.
wild.
Oh, I wish it was that short here. It goes on forever.
So what I think the strategy is going to occur is that and I'm not alone on this. This is not an outlier opinion for your listeners. Is that Mark Carney will visit the Governor General, the representative of the King, and ask for an election in the next week, maximum 2, so that the 30-day, 40-day period can commence. Because the Liberal Party is polling as best as it has been since 2021. So if you have the best polling in these past 4 years right now, and you are neck and neck with the Conservatives, who everyone thought were shoo-ins, you've now made it a race. It's important to do it right away. The other truth is that the Conservatives and the New Democrats who are in opposition have done a really good job in the past with more intellectual, liberal leaders and in running attack ads or even just contrasting campaigns. So Michael Ignatieff, for example, was another internationally known author, historian, and the campaign was simple. He didn't come back for you to Canada, referencing him being in Harvard, him being abroad, and it destroyed their campaign and led to a Conservative majority. So that's essentially the calculus, is that if Carney's riding high right now, they want an election right now. And so how soon are they going to call the election so that they could continue to ride a wave of support? That's the big question right now in Canada.
And I wonder if Trudeau will get a big job in the new government since he's quite popular again. Who knows?
Maybe he'll be the ambassador to, somewhere in the Eurozone.
Yeah, or foreign minister, perhaps. He could do all the journey. Listen, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. Jen Hassom there, Executive Director at the Broadbent Institute in Canada. That's an independent Canadian think tank. Quick break, back in a second.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there. This is Talk, and it is Petrie here with you until 1 o'clock. And coming up at midnight, it's your chance to talk back. Yup. To have your say. And it's a whole hour of just you and me, just chatting through the morning, really. And I want to talk to you about the two-tier justice plan. And the sentencing chief has defended that today and said, actually, it's not that deep, really. But I want to know whether you think that somebody's past should be a mitigating factor on their sentencing. Because pre-sentencing reports are not new, right? Your defence attorney, your defence lawyer barrister, whoever, can say, look, I think there are mitigating circumstances here, and that should have a say in what the sentencing is. Now, that much I do agree with, but when you look at the new rules, okay, pre-sentencing report will normally be considered necessary if the offender belongs to one or more of the following cohorts: at risk of first custodial sentence and or at risk of sentence of 2 years or less, a young adult between 18 and 25, female, why? That's wrong, for a start. From an ethnic minority, cultural minority and or faith minority community. I don't know what difference that would make to somebody stabbing somebody, okay? Pregnant or postnatal, sole or primary carer for dependent relatives. Now that's an interesting one. Does that mean that, okay, so two people commit the same crime, one of them's a bloke who doesn't have responsibility for a relative, and the other one is a woman who looks after her mum. They've done the same crime, but she'll get a lesser sentence than he does because she's looking after a dependent relative. Now, you may think, yes, that's fair, that is reasonable. But you might also think, well, hang on a minute, what's that got to do with justice? What's that got to do with the punishment part of the justice system? So I'm really interested to see if you agree with this or not. It just depends how much you think that justice is kind of optional, in a sense. Sentencing is, depending on who you are, or it should be the crime that dictates what the sentence is. Should it be the crime or the person? Give me a call. I could be persuaded in either direction on this, to be perfectly honest with you. 0344 499 1000 is the number that you need.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, this is Talk, and it's Petrie here with you until 1 o'clock. And joining me now is Alex, Three Lions Irons, TalkSport presenter and producer. Hello there. Oh, I did it again.
Hello, good evening. You did. Hello.
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 Hello. I'm thinking of bringing my dog in tomorrow. I should have done it today, and then I wouldn't have spoken to you like you are my dog. Right.
I'm hairy enough, though, so don't blame me.
I don't know. He's just had a haircut. Talk to me about Man United players are overpaid and not good.
Yeah, so not good enough and overpaid. Those are comments made by the club's co-owner, Sir Jim Ratcliffe. He made those in an interview earlier today and singled out 5 players, though 3 of them currently still at the club. Casemiro, Rasmus Højlund and Andre Onana are 3 of the current first-team players he singled out, and wingers Anthony and Jadon Sancho, who are both on loan at the moment. The billionaire has essentially said that these players are ones that he inherited before his regime, and it looks like he wants to get rid of them in the not-too-distant future. It's a bit of an odd one because Ratcliffe has essentially come in and made a lot of cuts. Stewards no longer get a packed lunch. People have been made redundant, and now he's essentially come out and said these are players that aren't good enough to be playing for the club and wearing the shirt, which, if you were one of those players, I'd be pretty demoralised by the fact that the co-chairman has come out and singled you out.
And does he know, aside from being rich, what else qualifies him to make those comments?
So he is a fan of the club. He's a boyhood fan, which I think for anyone who grows up supporting a club to own a part of it or to own a club is a dream for anybody. He does also have another club. He owns Lyon in France. So that's another club that he doesn't own any. Nice. He's also the chairman of Nice. So it's not his first club that he's taken charge of. So he knows how to run a club, but even here, I think he's bitten off more than he can chew, or he's tried to chew, and they're a year in now, and what seemed like a good relationship building up with fans at the time has completely soured now. And
those players, there's quite a few of them, right?
Yeah.
How are they supposed to continue playing?
Well, they have to. They're professional footballers. It's in their contract. If the manager picks them to play football, they're going to have to play through it. And in the back of their head, maybe they'll think, my time either could be up, or I've really got to pull my socks up and really trying to impress the chairman, not just the chairman, but the manager and the fans as well. So, it might be a kick up the backside for some of these players, but they also might not take to it well. And we'll see in the next coming weeks as the season comes to a conclusion. I mean, Manchester United have had the worst season for quite some time. They're currently 14th in the Premier League. Yeah. And they're, not just Ratcliffe, but the manager, Ruben Amorim, have pledged silverware by the end of 2028. So they've got 3 years to do that, and they're a long, long way off it.
And how do they get rid of the players if they wanted to get rid of them? Can they just sack them for halfway through, or are there contracts? Do they have to sell them?
They could
what do they do?
They could run their contracts out, which I don't think will happen. They will maybe try and sell these players on to other clubs. They'll put them up for transfer listing.
But you've just said they're rubbish. Who's going to buy them?
There will be other clubs that will see that there is potential in those players and potentially get them working in other clubs. Some players move to clubs thinking it's their dream club to play for, and it doesn't work out for them. And maybe that's going to be the case this time around with these players. We've seen Anthony go on loan, one of those players mentioned, to Real Betis in Spain, and it's really lightened up his career. Like, he's playing really well over there. Jadon Sancho's on loan at Chelsea at the moment, and he's been a bit hot and cold at the moment. But when he has performed well, he's performed really well. So maybe this just isn't the right place for these players, and if they do move on, hopefully they go on to clubs that can really push their careers on.
I just can't help but think that if my boss was out there saying that about me, I wouldn't be very happy.
No, same with mine either. But and hopefully he's not listening.
No, he loves you, doesn't he? I'll put in a good word. Don't worry about
it.
Thank you. Buffalo Bills quarterback. Talk to me about this.
Yeah, so Josh Allen is the quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, and he is potentially going to be earning or he will be the highest earning quarterback in NFL history. He's signed a contract extension until 2030 worth of up to a reported $330 million. That's £255 million, making him one of the highest paid players in NFL history. He was the most valuable player for the season just gone, and he will receive a guaranteed £193 million, according to reports. We compare that to Kansas City Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes, who, of course, has been in 3 Super Bowls as of the past 3 years. He signed a 10-year deal in 2020 worth just $450 million or £349 million.
And that's for the whole 10 years?
That's for the whole 10 years.
$35 million a year, basically.
Yeah. Whereas Josh Allen has signed an extension compared to what he was on already for another 5 years worth £255 million. So whenever people say that Premier League players are overpaid, maybe turn your eye towards the NFL, where yes, these players are incredibly fit, but they're only playing for about 20 weeks of the year.
25 million a year, would you get out of bed for that?
Yes. I wouldn't go to sleep.
I might even get into bed for that.
Me too, actually, to be fair.
Yeah, to be
into
fair.
bed, on the floor, wherever.
Wherever you want me. Talk to me about the home nations. This is a really interesting thing. Could it change the men's World Cup?
Well, it will change the women's, because the home nations are to make a joint bid for the 2035 Women's World Cup. The football associations of England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales have expressed their intention to submit a joint bid to host that year's World Cup. The announcement follows a decision by world governing body FIFA, which recommends the tournament is hosted in Europe or Africa in that year. Bids for 2031 and 2035 will have to be submitted in the fourth quarter of this year. The US are favourites to host the tournament in 2031 after they pulled out the vote in 2027, which was won by Brazil. So anyone looking forward to watch the Women's World Cup the next time it comes round, it'll be over in Brazil, and it will be shown in the US on Netflix, who will show live coverage in both of those years as well. Of course, here in the UK, the World Cup and the Women's World Cup is a crown jewel of sporting events, which will be free, or must be offered free to air for broadcasters. So we'll probably see it on the likes of ITV, the BBC, and of course on talkPsport as well when it comes out in 10 years' time.
So this is all the home nations. There's Ireland, Scotland, Wales.
So it will be all
England.
of them. So it'll be Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England.
Oh, okay.
So you would imagine that different stadiums will be up for hosting games. You'll probably see Croke Park in Northern Ireland, Murrayfield, or one of the 2 Scottish stadiums for Rangers and Celtic, to potentially be one of the host stadiums for the women's game. And of course, the final you'd imagine will be at Wembley Stadium, but other stadiums may be potentially up in Manchester, Birmingham, Newcastle, ones that we have seen hosts games in Euros before, especially in 1996, and of course in 2020 when we partially hosted the Euros during that COVID year. So it'll be a good mix and match.
This is unusual for a joint bid to be made between all of these. It would normally be a single bid.
Yeah, so normally it would be one nation. So of course England hosted the Euros in '96, but we are seeing more and more nations put joint bids together. So we've got coming up next year for the World Cup, we've got Canada, the US and Mexico. Whether it will still be Canada, US and Mexico, and Trump hasn't invaded them both by then, who knows. We are seeing for 2030, 6 nations across 3 continents host the World Cup for the centennial year. So you've got Portugal, Spain and Morocco hosting the World Cup jointly together, with 3 other nations hosting the first couple of group games, those being, I think, Uruguay, Uruguay, Argentina and Paraguay. The first ever World Cup was, of course, held in Uruguay, so which is why they're trying to bring in those nations as well to kind of celebrate this 100 year of the World Cup. But I think even just having 3 and having it across Morocco, Portugal and Spain is overkill. Adding 6 more nations in there on the other side of the world just takes it and throws it out the window.
Yeah, it becomes
of course,
really
Saudi,
complicated then, doesn't it?
yeah, Saudi have also will be hosting in 2034. So it becomes a fact where most nations who are kind of coming together maybe either want to make a big event, or it's just because it's so expensive to host these events now
Do they have to
it
spread the
makes more
cost? Yeah.
it makes more sense for more than one country to put a joint bid in together
Yeah.
than just for one to hold it on their own.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Alex, thank you very much indeed. Alex Three Lions Irons, TalkSport presenter and producer. Well, on her way is Caroline Faraday, so don't go anywhere.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And a good evening. It is Talk, and it's Petrie here with you until 1 o'clock. And coming up at the top of the hour, Vincent Moss will be here to go through the newspapers. But right now, I'm thrilled to say the multi award-winning entertainment journalist based in LA, Caroline Faraday, joins us now. How are you?
Don't be too thrilled. It'll be a desperate disappointment.
Well, your awards don't say that, do they? No.
Wait a minute. I should have placed them differently.
You haven't got enough room, love. I mean, they just... Now, listen.
Well, the Golden Mike Awards coming up in a couple of weeks. Keep your fingers crossed for me.
I won't need to. I won't need to.
Okay,
but I will. I will, obviously. Talk to me about the Menendez brothers. Now, the Menendez brothers I'm fascinated by, and I've watched both the drama and the documentary and just about anything that's going on about them. And the Menendez brothers will be re-sentenced later this month. Is that taking into account what is now believed to have been horrendous sexual abuse that they suffered?
Yes and no.
Right.
So here's where it stands. The DA, the district attorney in LA, put them forward for resentencing after the Netflix documentary, and then we had an election, and now there's a new DA, and so then it has gone up to Governor Gavin Newsom, and he sort of said, well, I'll leave it to the DA, but I'd be up to putting it in front of the parole board. So he's sort of considering a clemency position. So this is the siblings who killed their parents in 1989, Jose and Mary Louise Kitty Menendez, Happened in LA. Big case here. If you haven't watched the Netflix show, it really is worth watching.
It's amazing,
because it sort of messes with your mind, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Of what's true, what's not, where you have empathy with, and what means what. Now, the new DA is called Hosken, and he said he will consider this new sentencing, but his big kind of line in the sand on this is that there's 20 lies that he says that the brothers told in their 2 trials. Don't want to spoil the ending. I don't want to spoil the ending, but they ended up in jail.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's a bit like the Titanic. It's a given, really, isn't it?
yeah. Let me tell you about Sixth Sense, that movie. Anyway, and he says they've only owned up to 4 of this. So there's these lies that hang on, just send that person to voicemail. There's these lies that the brothers have not owned up to. They lied about the 911 call about discovering their parents' bodies. They lied to police, family and friends, and the media about their involvement in the media. They lied to police, family and friends, suggesting the mafia was involved in their murders. He lied when he told his expert psychiatrist that his parents would kill him because his father's homosexual lover warned him that he was in danger 2 days for the murder. And there's all these kind of lies that have been told. And also, so you asked about this particular piece of evidence. The particular piece of evidence that they're saying is critical to their case is that someone came forward and said, well, actually, the father sexually assaulted me. And the position of the district attorney is essentially that if the brothers, like that doesn't have a bearing on whether or not they murdered their parents, in that if they weren't aware of that, what bearing does it have? And if it was an historical piece of sexual assault, either way, that it's not a self-defense. Even
they
if
were claiming
that was going on there.
They claimed that they were sexually abused by him.
Yeah, correct. But to claim self-defense, you've got to think that your life is in danger in that moment, right? Rather than, let's say you, strange example, but let's go with it. Let's say you 5 years ago had sexually assaulted me, and I came and killed you today. You can't make an argument that that is in self-defense.
Right.
Whereas if you were in the process of sexually assaulting me and I hit you over the head with something, then you could make an argument that that's in self-defense. There's a very basic way of explaining why it's not self-defense.
But wouldn't there have been some mitigation, though? Had they been able to get people to believe this sexual abuse? I thought the question was also that the sentence would have been different, that even though they still murdered their parents, that potentially there could have been some leniency attached to that because of the sexual abuse.
I think that in order for that then to have an impact on for this district attorney, for him then to recommend and assess, he's not going to give them a new trial. It's just not going to happen.
No.
So in order to say, let's have a look at the evidence we've got and should there be a new sentencing, this district attorney, who's Hosken, as differently, I think, really to his predecessor, Gascon, who was quite controversial, was considered quite a lenient district attorney. He said, well, it's possible that they might be resentenced to a lesser term. If they're resentenced to a lesser term, it might allow them to seek parole or be released on time served, right? And so essentially, he says it would only be kind of appropriate for resentencing if, legal stuff, if they admit these lies that were told. So that, yes, the point that you make is this one thing, but what about all these other lies? I think is, in order to be able to be put forward for parole, you know, people have to take accountability for their crimes. That's quite a big part of parole is this moment of taking accountability, perhaps apologizing to your victims, which obviously you can't, but taking accountability. And so even if you believe the allegations of sexual assault or not, these other lies are still an issue for the DA, for the district attorney.
It's going to be fascinating, and like you said, if you've not watched either the documentary or the drama about the Menendez brothers, do, because it's absolutely fascinating. Let's move on quickly to Twitter. See, we're calling it Twitter again.
Let's just Twitter.
Just Twitter.
Sorry, X, formerly Twitter.
Yeah, whatever. So they're going to have loads of people are not able to get into it now. Elon Musk was saying that he thinks this is a country that's gone for him. I think it's anonymous.
Yeah, it's been about 3 or 4 times today that there have been issues with X, formerly known as Twitter. About 60% of users had like issues trying to connect. Loads of people reporting problems. Lots of problems in kind of major cities around the world with it as well, reporting that. Unfortunately, forced people onto Threads, the rival platform, just saying, over there. Then he said, well, it must be Ukraine, because apparently everything's just getting blamed on Ukraine these days. So we might as well blame Ukraine for that as well, apparently.
I mean, ridiculous. And he's talking about taking Starlink away from them as retribution. It's just like he doesn't know. I think it's anonymous. They've been threatening him for ages.
He wants an excuse to take away Starlink from them, because his intention is to take Starlink away from them, because it's just tightening the thumb screws. But anyway, it's gone down 3rd time. So there is a hacking group, Dark Storm team, who have owned up to it, but it is that 3rd major outage of the day. I think that a few years ago, people used to use it far more for their businesses and work, and I do think people have moved away from that now. You know, when you think about social media influencers who use social media as a selling platform, that's far more on Instagram.
I think Twitter's become an absolute cesspit. I deleted my app about a month ago. Yeah.
I very rarely delve into a read of it, and then I always need some sort of shower after.
Yes, quite. You know, a lot of people are going after Musk at the moment, and I cannot for the life of me imagine why. Let's talk about Meghan. I was reading today that Netflix are aware that that it's not very popular, but the second series was already made while the first one was being made. So her going, yeah, I've got a second series, is actually a little bit disingenuous. But you didn't mind it.
Oh, disingenuous? Surely not. I don't believe it.
I know, it's shocking, isn't it? But you didn't. You watched it,
isn't it? Right. So this is her series on Netflix. Meghan Markle, you know, home goddess, whatever it is. I think it's interesting with Meghan, isn't it? Because I sat down and thought, well, I'll hate watch this, because partly because I'm going to get asked about it, and partly because I need to talk about it with my friends. Anyway, so she's very good at that, but I didn't totally hate it. I will say that. I'll come back to that. There are things I did hate about it. But yes, she on Friday was like celebrating with her arms in the air, you know, seen celebrating, and said, we're doing this second season. And then it's kind of come out, well, actually, that was already filmed, so it isn't some contract renewal. It was just that they filmed it at the same time. Of course, they filmed it not in her Montecito home, in somebody else's Montecito home, which looks very nice.
It does, but that was cheap. I mean, it was only 8 million, and hers is 15 million. So I can't imagine why that was better than hers.
Maybe it was. I think if I wouldn't want my real kitchen. Gordon Ramsay doesn't he have a second kitchen in his own home that he uses for filming, and then his actual kitchen? You're not going to keep your own kitchen clear, are you? It's full of kids' junk and homework
and pictures on the fridge. Right, yeah, we've got a clip on the Instagram clip. This is Meghan promoting the new series on Insta.
Laid under the willow tree, the last weekend of summer, the empire at our fingertips, the autumn to discover.
Yeah. I haven't even watched it.
She's an actress, right? So she's playing the role very well of home goddess in this thing. But there's funny little details that one notices. For instance, she goes out to the bees. You saw a little clip there where she's going out to the bees in her beekeeping outfit, and you think she's never done this before. And if you look at her beekeeping outfit, it is pristine white, like box fresh trainers, right? Like it's never been worn. And the poor dude who's with her, who does actually handle the bees, you can see his is marked and dirty and definitely been used. And then she also she just puts every time she's baking something, I'm like, flour sprinkles, and then 2 minutes later there come the flowers. Everything's getting these flower sprinkles on, and everything has to be a lesson. That said, she makes a lovely balloon arch, and she gets this guy round who's a chef, and he makes this fried chicken that looks absolutely delicious. So there's that, but she does talk a lot about the guest experience. Have you ever had anybody stay over your house and been like, listen, I need to leave some bath salts for you for your guest experience? I'm always like, you can use the shampoo and shower gel if you want. Towels.
Just wipe the screen afterwards.
Make yourself at home. Yeah, leave the window open because the fan's not working. And
of course, that's normal, right? That is normal. And get yourself breakfast because I might not be up. Caroline, it's wonderful to see you. Good luck at those awards, not that you need it. Caroline Faraday there, award-winning entertainment journalist based in LA, and a fabulous woman to boot. Right, coming up, Vincent Moss will be in the studio to go through the papers.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there. It is good to have your company, and with me in the studio is Vincent Moss, former political editor. Very nice to see you.
Hello.
Hello. Now, before we move on to the papers, I want to talk to you about this sentencing, this two-tier, allegedly, in inverted commas, justice plan, because the sentencing chief has defended it. And basically, these are pre-sentencing reports. Now, they are quite a common thing. If your defence lawyer thinks you have mitigating circumstances, they'll ask ask for a pre-sentencing report, which is done by a social worker or by, you know, other people, who will say, yes, this person has been abused, or they've had this sort of life or that sort of life, and that will come into mitigation when it comes to sentencing. However, what is being suggested now is that a pre-sentencing report will be considered necessary if the person in the dock is from an ethnic minority, a cultural minority, and or a faith minority. Also includes if you're female, as if that's mitigation in itself, because they're not always asked for. They're not always deemed necessary. The crime speaks to the sentence. So it seems that this is expanding now to include that if you are an ethnic minority, you will immediately get a pre-sentencing report. Do you think that that is beginning to create a different language of sentencing for different groups of people?
I think it clearly is. I mean, both the government and the opposition seem united against these sentencing guidelines because they are unfair and everybody should be equal before the eyes of the law. And yes, there are mitigating circumstances. So, for example, if a woman who's been subject to years of domestic abuse is then charged on some assault charge, then that's very good mitigation that comes out in the pre-sentencing report. But the idea that just because of your sex or your ethnicity you should get a report and that somehow is a mitigating factor is crazy and unfair. So I think you either do it for everybody, which would be too time consuming, or you do it in certain cases, as happens at the moment, and that mitigation is taken into account by the judge. But the idea that just because you're from a particular community you should get a discount, if you like, on the sentence is absolutely crazy, isn't it? And I'm sure that that's why unusually in politics you've got both the Conservatives and the Labour Party both being critical of this.
It is interesting though, because there are mitigating circumstances, of course, for people, but I was saying earlier that if you also, what's in there is sole or primary carer for a dependent relative. So you could have somebody who's a carer committing a crime and somebody who isn't a carer committing a crime. The crime is the same, the victim is the same, but the sentencing is different because of that. It seems so unfair, but we already know that mitigation takes place. So is this just an extension of that, or is this going off into the deep?
It seems to be going further than that. And of course, some of the things that could be taken into account, of course, is we're talking about mitigating factors that might get you a discount on your sentence, but they're also aggravating factors as well. So if they look into your past and you've committed the offence loads and loads of times and for no other reason than you just a robber and want to steal things, then the aggravating factor should be looking at harsher sentences as well. Some people have clearly got mitigating circumstances and might deserve a lower sentence for a very good reason, but then the other people who you just think they're here again, they've got no reason to be here other than they want to acquire other people's property without their permission, and they probably deserve harsher sentences. I mean, it's very difficult because, as I understand the rules, there's a limit to what the government can do about this, even though they don't agree with that, without potentially changing the law as things stand.
Yes, because the sentencing review body is separate.
That's right, yes.
So they're the ones that make
So they
decisions.
set the rules, and in a way that's a good thing, because obviously the judiciary and politicians should be separate, because you end up with very bad outcomes if you've got politicians effectively potentially jailing their opponents, as we see in some other countries. That's a good thing. But in cases like this, where they're clearly out of step with not just one political party, but pretty much all political sides and most of the public, you would think there has to be, you would hope there'd be a rethink, but it looks like the Sentencing Council's doubling down on its position.
It seems that the only group here that won't get an automatic pre-sentencing report is a white man.
Yeah, and this has been said, and maybe in a few years' time there'll come a point when white men are themselves seen as worthy of discounts and these sort of things. But yes, there is an assumption, and it probably has been true. I think when you look at some of the criminal justice statistics, there has been an argument made that if you're from a certain community, often a black community, for example, that if you commit the same crime as a young, you get a harsher sentence. So it might be an assault, or it might be related to knife crime. And when those stats have been compared, they've been very unfavourable because of this potential bias, inbuilt bias among quite often white male judges who may take a very different view of other people. Now that's another argument about fixing the inbuilt bias in the judiciary and making sure you have people from all walks of life and all genders there. but that's not an argument to giving people time off and building in a bias. You don't correct one bias by creating another bias somewhere else, which is what seems to be happening here.
It isn't, because that's exactly the point that let me get his name, the head of the Sentencing Council, Lord Justice William Davis, is saying. He's saying that this is to correct what has been going on, and he said that the system at the moment gives longer prison sentences to minority criminals than white ones for crimes including drug dealing, and that the sentences passed by courts need more scrutiny, and judges must also be equipped with the information they need to pass fair sentences on people from more deprived backgrounds than their own. So the suggestion, obviously, as you were just saying, is that judges are not diverse enough, that they have no clue. It's often what we complain about with our politicians, isn't it? They've never walked in our shoes. They don't know what it's like to not be able to put the heating on. They don't know what it's like to be me. And judges certainly don't. At the moment, they don't seem to. If somebody lives in a high-rise block of flats and they've bullied ever since they were the age of 4, and they turn to a gang and sell drugs, and they get caught up in that crime, how much of that is their fault, and how much of it is because of the deprivation they were brought up in? And I think that that's where I kind of look at this slightly more nuanced, because I do think that, my son is way less likely to turn to criminality because of the childhood he had and the mother that he had and where we lived. Whereas if it's not your fault if you're, like I said, bullied from the age of 4 and you live in a high-rise block of flats that's run by criminals.
Yeah, and you look at, for example, things like the harsh sentences that are often given out to people who were disproportionately, women for example, on TV licence non-payment, because they're disproportionately at home potentially, and older people are disproportionately more at home. So when inquiries were made, there was a disproportionate number of women and older people who were getting quite harsh sentences for non-payment of their television licences. So there are all sorts of factors that come into play. And yes, if you've had a reasonably well-off upbringing, you are less likely to be there shoplifting for food, or just because you want to shoplift, or for all sorts of other reasons. So there's lots of good reasons for mitigating factors to be taken into account, but it can't be a kind of a class-wide action just based on gender, ethnicity, age, or something like that. It's something you have to look at on a case-by-case basis. And I think at a time when the criminal justice system is creaking all over the place, you can't really do these pre-sentencing reports for everybody. So I would have thought the more sensible way of doing it is by issuing more guidelines to judges, saying, look, come on, when you are looking at similar cases, give out similar penalties. Don't, because one of the big things that was always argued, I can't remember the exact word for it, but it was this idea that if you were from a upper middle class family and you were heading on your way to Oxford or Cambridge and you got a conviction that might ruin your chances, you should somehow get a lesser sentence then, because you were going to have a bright, glittering future. Well, there's an argument you should know better. So there's all sorts of disparities in the criminal justice system that need fixing, and you don't fix those by blanket guidelines. You fix those by getting better, more representative judges and making sure you fund the system properly, so you've got enough prison places to send proper criminals to, and you've got rehab for those that need rehab. None of which we've got at the moment, really, have we?
No, and you've got young people right now whose life chances are, and they're in fact worse for white boys. Apparently they're doing the worst in the education system at the moment. You've got these young people who are, they believe, deprived of a future. They are living in a rough neighbourhood. They see the gangs. They're told how much money they're making. Perhaps their mum is on her own with few other kids. There's poverty. Going and working at your local Tesco stacking shelves is not going to bring in the sort of money that you need, and so you join a gang and you sell drugs in order to get money to help support your mother and your siblings. I mean, there's a slightly rose-coloured view, but I do know of young men that have done that, and some of them in my son's social circle when he was growing up. Really polite boys, really lovely to me, always kind, always respectful. 2 of them are in jail right now, and not because they're bad people, but that they had a really bad start in life. And I wonder how much is then their fault. Okay, we know the difference between right and wrong, but it's easy to have morals when you can afford them.
Absolutely, and in some areas, particularly in inner cities and parts of London and other big cities, well, absolutely, and so often children join these gangs because it's safer to join them, because they get protection, because if they walk into the wrong areas, they get picked on by the gangs, so they may not even want to get involved in some of the criminal activity. It's just safer to be in a gang than not from their perception, because they can't walk into a different postcode without getting challenged, and it's a very difficult world, and if you grow up in that environment, it's very hard to break out of it.
There is a mitigation there, isn't there? There has to be, in terms of society letting these people down, allowing these criminal gangs to flourish. You know, that's not their fault. That's the police, that's the justice system, that's all of these things that have failed them. And in that regard, there is mitigation. But that should be across.
This seems
then do we have a different set of laws for poor people who've had a rough time?
Well, that's right. I mean,
is it the crime or the person?
And is being poor, and there'll be older listeners and viewers who remember much greater poverty in the 50s and 60s, and they didn't turn to crime. And yet we are better off, although many people are still not that well off, and yet shoplifting is endemic in many parts of the country, and a lot of that will be younger and more vulnerable people sent into shops by gang leaders to commit the crime and take the stuff out that can then be sold. It may not even be for their own use. It may be that they're told to go and do it as part of a gang thing, and then the goods are passed on to other people to sell or to use.
I mean, should justice just be black and white and just say, no, it's the crime, not the person? So whatever the crime is, that's the sentence. It doesn't matter where you come from, what you've done before, the sentence is the same.
Well, that would probably act as a deterrent, because then people have got clarity and they know that if they're shoplifting, then they've got a certain sentence. Whereas now, if you're a prolific shoplifter, you could be looking at jail, and if you've done it 3 or 4, 5, 6 times, you might not get anything at all. And that disparity just causes confusion, and it undermines the system, because shopkeepers and the public and everybody else thinks, well, there's not much sentencing going on, you never know what you're going to get. And even when you do get a sentence, of course, you get 10 years, often means you're only going to serve 4. If you get a year, you may only serve 4 or 5 months. So there's a real confusion over sentencing, and this has just really made it even worse.
Yeah, it really has. Thank you for that. Right, let's have a look at the papers and start with the USA. I think it's at the bottom of your pack. American papers. USA Today. Trump's actions thrill the right. He is checking all the boxes off the Conservatives' wish list: dismantle the education department, on it, end foreign aid, sure, fire thousands of federal workers, done, with a combination of chutzpah, a disregard for the legal niceties, and a political opposition in such turmoil that is struggling to challenge them. President Trump, in 7 weeks, has been putting in place goals that Conservatives have been dreaming about for decades.
It's true, isn't it? I mean, if you like Trump, he's doing a lot of things that you like, but this comes at a time when the stock market's if not crashed, a lot of the stock market's in big decline today, and he hasn't ruled out potentially of a recession. So it's not going gangbusters on all fronts, is it, really?
No, but they're all still blaming Biden for that.
Well, there's only so long you can do that, isn't it? I mean, the same thing's happening over here, but that works for a while. But he's running the economy. He's pulling all the levers. He's getting rid of an awful lot of federal employees. And yet today, the NASDAQ, the sort of tech shares market, is down about 4%. I think Tesla shares are down about 15%. So not a great day for Elon Musk. I'm sure he can afford it, but not a great day for him.
Well, he's already lost $100 billion this year off his Tesla stock. And most of his money is in Tesla.
That's true, and that's not doing very well at the moment. No. And there's electric cars aren't selling as well as they're supposed to be selling. So, but I think he can afford it, can't he? I mean, 100 billion to him is probably like 10 quid to us.
394 billion now, I think.
Oh, okay.
Right. I could live on that for a while. Yeah. But the crunch point comes, and this is what people have got to understand, is that he's rich on paper. He borrowed money against his stock value to buy X, for example. So that's all borrowed money. And he's managed to lose some value in that as well. And the more of his sort of right-wing rhetoric and all of that goes out, the more he will lose on that, right? So he doesn't want to pay tax because, you know, why should he? He's a billionaire. So the only way he doesn't have to pay tax is borrowing money. So he borrows money against his Tesla stock, which is 12.9 or 6% of Tesla stock, was valued at $1 trillion, is now in the 900s, so it's lost value. And he is borrowing money against that stock and spending that money, so he doesn't pay tax on it. But if his value drops and he owes more money than his stock value is worth, he's bankrupt. I mean, literally bankrupt.
He could be, but isn't it the old cliche that if you owe the bank $1 million, you've got a problem, but if you owe the bank 100 million, the bank's got a problem.
But at the moment, with Tesla stock going down and people not liking the narrative that's coming out from him, he has a board. He only owns 12.6%. They are not going to tolerate the plummeting stock value of Tesla, because there are shareholders, right? So it's not just Musk. There are other people involved here, and at some point they're going to say this. You know, some are saying that it's a triple B stock now. Some are saying it's a BAA3, which means don't lend against it. You know, there are lots of different people now suggesting that this stock is going to drop. It's already lost so much value, and it could go down again to about $125, which is a massive drop from the $400 plus.
Yeah, it's a big drop,
right?
Isn't
It's a huge drop, and people are now being advised to think carefully. A lot of big companies who've got the 401k pensions in are now going, okay, well, we're going to sell some of that stock off now because we don't trust that it's not going to drop further. So he's in it. I mean, he can afford it for now. Nobody's crying any tears for him. But it could flip, and SpaceX is on borrowed money, Twitter's on borrowed money. That's it.
Yeah, although Trump's got his own crypto, so he'll probably be okay. But he does need the economy to work, otherwise he does lose American support. He's basically in on the strength of his promise that he'll put more money in people's pockets, he'll make the economy strong, and he'll deal with immigration. Same promises pretty much made over here. But if he doesn't do that and the economy is not looking that strong, and it is looking a bit shaky in America, possible recession on the way, then they've all got problems.
Yeah,
Musk, Trump,
and actually his crypto coin immediately went up to about $80 from a very low base. It has completely dropped again.
Yeah.
So, you know, they were all the MAGA people buying it. Anyway, Canadian backlash is the other story here. The stores are not going to put stuff back on the shelves, even though Trump is flip-flopped on the tariffs. And Canada said, look, we're sick of it. On again, off again. We're sticking with our tariffs now. 25% has just gone on electricity coming out from Ottawa. We're sticking with it until tariffs are off the table completely. You've got to admire the Canadians.
Exactly, they're sticking up for themselves. Big sign on a sort of shelf of alcohol. They're saying we're no longer selling liquor from the USA. Ask us about some great local and Canadian alternatives. Not what Trump wants to see. And it's all very well saying he'll slap tariffs on people, but if they fight back, then it doesn't work so well, does it? No,
and also the Canadians are basically us, right? We've got long memories, and it's like, no, I'm not buying American now. So stuff you. Yeah. You can do what you like with tariffs. I'm not. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've right kicked us, and we're not going back to it.
Yeah.
So very, very interesting. And the final hours of Hackman and his wife, Arakwa, and they're still trying to say. They say that Betsy, his wife, she was strolling through the pharmacy within hours. She was dead. They think that she had some kind of a disease and she died, but it's still very suspicious. It's very odd, isn't it?
It's very odd and very sad that it was undiscovered for so long, that despite their sort of his fame and all their money and relatives and friends, that nobody thought to check on them.
Terrible, absolutely awful. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll start looking through the UK papers for Tuesday.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hi there, great to have your company. With me is Vincent Moss, who's a former political editor. And let's have a look at the Daily Mirror. In fact, most of the papers are, of course, covering this story, and that is the North Sea inferno, a catastrophe. Oil tanker and toxic chemical ship collide, fears for wildlife. And also, as we came to air, I understood that they'd reported there was one person missing when it was thought that everybody had made it out alive. How does this happen? They are both big ships. They didn't see each other.
Both huge and presumably equipped with all the best radar and things like that. So even if there is poor visibility, that you should have thought that would have picked it up. They haven't ruled out the suggestion that this catastrophe wasn't somehow bad actors at play, so we don't fully know what caused it yet, but two huge ships in presumably not particularly bad weather, and one of them at anchor, because it was the Stena Immaculate, which was loaded with the US military jet fuel, and that was at anchor when it was hit by a Portuguese flagged container ship, causing multiple explosions. So it's not even as though it was two ships moving along. One's absolutely stationary.
So he must have gone,
huge.
that Portuguese ship must have gone tanking in there. I mean, like literally really fast to cause that.
Yes.
It is suspicious. I mean, the fact that one of them was carrying US jet fuel, for me, it is suspicious. I mean, we've had Norway refusing to fuel American ships and things like that. And so that's possibly why the tanker was heading in that direction. But, you know, it's just odd.
It's all very odd, and it comes in an area, and we know that Russian submarines and other bad actors working on behalf of the Russians are dragging the various bits of the ocean to try and disrupt the cables and the communications cables. So hopefully more will emerge. But it's not just the sort of the incident itself, but it's all the pollution. I mean, you can't. I mean, there's one of the substances. I don't know how dangerous it is the chemical sodium cyanide, which doesn't sound bad. It does sound bad. So that with all the huge amount of jet fuel there. So, I mean, what that will mean for the Yorkshire coastline in the next few days, I guess we'll find out. But pretty terrible and pretty sort of graphic images there on most of the front pages.
Yeah, it is really. I think we know the devastation we're going to see, and it's just horrendous. My team just updated me. There was a person missing, but they've subsequently called off the search. So it must be now just a recovery situation as opposed to a rescue situation. So that's the Mirror for Tuesday. Horrendous images, and we just know, don't we, the devastation that's going to cause to wildlife. Again, to the Eye, jet fuel spills into North Sea. That's a more distant picture, which is actually more horrific, because you can see the size of that boat that was hit. I mean, it's enormous.
Exactly.
It's way bigger than the Stena Immaculate. Oh no, that is the Stena Immaculate. The Solong was carrying 15 containers, and that went into the Stena Immaculate. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, huge. I mean,
huge boat.
Size of several football pitches, and the tugs pouring all the water onto all the fireboats there, and they're tiny in comparison to these boats. So quite how it happened. I mean, I know they use navigation systems that are probably automated, but presumably there's somebody on the bridge when the ship is moving. So how that person, he or she, didn't see a giant moored
or here,
tanker
like you say, with radar and all of those systems that they must have in place. Oil tanker burning off East Yorkshire coast after collision and fireball. I mean, I'm not normally a suspicious person, but it does seem. It seems odd.
Yeah, it does.
I mean,
very definitely.
You know, top of the paper here, PIP payments freeze could cost welfare claimants up to £350 pounds a year. This is in order to claw back £5 billion from the welfare bill. And I think anybody would say the welfare bill is out of control, right? We know that the long-term sick payments, I was talking about this last week on this programme, they're at 65 billion this year. They're expected to be 100 billion in a couple of years' time. That's not sustainable, we know that. But of course, Labour's MPs are now really angry about this gutting of money for the long-term sick, because you will throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yes, and there is lots of Labour mutterings about this and how bad it could be. But as you say, the current bill is unsustainable, and there is an issue about how some of the payments for people who are sick and quite rightly should get some benefits, but their benefits seem to be higher than those who are in work. And that has caused some ructions, but the government needs, as we know, to make huge savings, and it's had its eyes for some time on the welfare bill, which is unsustainable, and it was unsustainable under the Conservatives, and they had plans to cut it had they been re-elected. And I think the question is not so much are they going to cut the welfare bill, but by how much and exactly where. And yes, while there is some suggestion of Labour MPs rebelling, they look at the opinion polls and they see reform chasing them very closely, and I suspect that any Labour rebellion will not be as big as is perhaps noised about in the newspapers.
Yeah, they're saying the rebels overestimate their numbers, because I think there is that suggestion that look, something has got to be done. So how they do that, I don't know.
And it's not just people who are unwell or perhaps could be working. It's I think it's now 1 in 8 18 to 24-year-olds are not in education, employment or training, and that's not good for them, let alone for the country and the economy. And we've got to find ways of finding those people decent pathways into work.
There's a story at the bottom there that makes you think, well, why can't they fix that instead of taking money off vulnerable people? MPs who get taxpayers to pay their London rent despite owning second homes in the capital.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you're 300 or 400 miles away, you need some accommodation away from home, like lots of people in other jobs get. But there is an issue about some MPs, I think of all parties, who have had a home in London, rented it out to maximise their own private income, and then got another place which they've used taxpayer money to pay for, and that can't be right, and that's something that should be looked at. Yeah,
that is disgusting. I mean, I know until before they drew, I think I've told you this before they redrew the lines, my local MP, Andy Slaughter, who lives literally 2 streets from me, he told me until they redrew the line, and even before they redrew the lines, he was entitled to a London flat.
Yeah, it's crazy. And there were MPs...
Shepherd's Bush.
Yes, and these are only places that are only 8-9 miles from work, and also they'll have constituents.
And the central line is like, what, a second? I mean, it takes no time at all. Absolutely.
And they can claim for late. If they work late, they can claim for a cab fare anyway. So yes, there was a big scandal a few years ago, and it's obviously still going on, where you could live in pretty much Greater London, and you'd have people who were working...
And you'd still get a second home.
And you'd still get a second home. Absolutely crazy.
Disgusting. I mean, how they even thought that was okay. I mean, he's literally 2 streets away from me in Shepherd's Bush. Yeah. And he said, no, I could have had a second home.
But he didn't claim it, presumably.
No,
so, yes, exactly.
No.
So
he just thought it was obscene.
Yeah. So
there are some good MPs around. Right. Oh, let's take a break. Before we move on. So Vincent and I are going to take a very short break, but we will be back in just a moment.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hi there. Good to have your company. Vincent Moss.
There was a Vincent Price, wasn't there?
I know, but how often do you get called Vincent Price?
I did used to back in the day. Vincent Price, yeah. Vince Hill.
Vince Hill.
Yeah.
Vincent Moss, that's just the first name that popped into my head, is with me to go through the papers. And the Daily Mail is going, how did the ship carrying sodium cyanide plough into a tanker full of US Navy jet fuel in broad daylight? So they are asking the right question, I think. But the big story they've got is found, but is the UK stuck with him? Migrant who said death to Jews arrested. Now Tories fear he'll be allowed to stay. This made it into the over the weekend, didn't it? It's this Palestinian guy called Abu Wadi. Britain may be stuck with a gun-toting Channel migrant due to human rights laws. It was feared last night. The Palestinian Abu Wadi, who said death to all Jews, is in custody following his arrest on Sunday night, 3 days after crossing from France in an inflatable dinghy. He recorded his entire journey as well, which is a bit of a finger up, isn't it? But the Home Office's own guidelines effectively prevent people being sent back to war-ravaged Gaza, because you can't send a human being into a war zone.
Well, it's a big test for the government because he was pictured on a Sunday newspaper, and it's good that he's already been arrested and picked up. But it will be a test now for the police and the authorities and the government what they do with him, because we saw there's videos around of what he said and what he's done. He came over illegally on a inflatable dinghy about 3 days ago from France. So what the authorities do with him now, it will be a real challenge, and it just shines a spotlight on many people who've speculated on exactly who is coming over in some of these small boats, and it confirms many people's worst fears that some of these people are extremely bad, dangerous people.
It is, though, the standard, not even just human rights, it's United Nations, all of those people, that you can't send somebody back to a war.
No, but I think in the short term, at least, presumably he'll be detained
or tagged,
exactly, or well, I would hope detained, but because tagged just is back out there. But it'll be interesting to see. I mean, he may be allowed to stay, but you would hope that would be in some kind of secure establishment, because it doesn't sound like the sort of person that should be free to roam.
No, but unless he's broken a law in this country, can he be detained?
Well, that would be a matter for the authorities to look at. I mean, it could be argued that he's inciting racial hatred, potentially. It could be argued that he's inciting terrorism, depending on what he said, don't know. But they'll have to look at all of that and see whether there are some things that they might be able to charge him under and detain him. Yeah, yep. It'll be, like you said, a real test for them, probably not one that they actually want to go through. The Sun newspaper, again, North Sea disaster, tanker full of US war jet fuel, cyanide aboard ship that hit it. Yeah, there's got to be some other story to this, I tell you. So that's the Sun newspaper dealing with that. And Kate is a lady in red. This is Princess Catherine, who was at the Commonwealth Memorial. Is that right? With King Charles, and they weren't able to make one last year because they both had just had their diagnosis, didn't they? The Guardian, number of jobless indefensible, says PM amid criticism over cuts. This is about the benefit system. Britain's benefit system is the worst of all worlds, with the numbers out of work training or work or training indefensible and unfair. I agree with that, but what is the solution when, like we saw with the winter fuel cuts, it's a hammer that hits a lot of people, right? It's not a scalpel. So with these cuts, presumably they're not going to take a scalpel to it and be very precise as to who that they take money away from. And I know, I'm not an idiot, that there are people swinging the lead, there are people lying, but it's the old argument about the death sentence, isn't it? If one person suffers because other people
If you get the wrong person, for example, you put them to death, then that negates the whole system. And does it negate the whole system if you make some people's lives miserable?
Well, and those are the ones that we're probably going to be hearing about over the coming months, are the ones that probably shouldn't have had their benefits cut. But it looks as though the government is looking at several fronts. It's not just about, as I think the government's talked about before, the moral case for those that could work, should be working, assuming that they can find work, but it will potentially also be about at what rate you uprate various benefits. And do you uprate them with inflation, or do you uprate them at a slightly lower rate? And the Guardian's talking about this meeting of MPs on Monday night that Keir Starmer's had, telling them that the tough decisions are coming, and that with disability benefits set to hit, as you said earlier, Petrie, 70 billion by 2030, the government's got to act. So definitely big cuts coming, and that's going to worry an awful lot of backbench Labour MPs and an awful lot of campaigners.
Yeah, so the Department for Work and Pensions is preparing to publish a green paper on sickness and disability benefit reform in the next few days. But a lot of people, a lot of critics of this ideal are saying, well, look, we do know that we have to do something, but there are a lot of people who say, well, I've been waiting for a year for a hospital appointment, which could fix me.
Yes.
And why should I be punished because the NHS isn't working?
And that's one of the levers the government's trying to pull. But I think the other thing they're really worried about is the huge surge there's been in new claims for some of these disability benefits.
Well, yeah, if you get the disability benefit, then you can be signed off having to look for work.
Yes.
That's the point.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then you have to look for work.
Yeah, and I think that one of the arguments that people have made is that you're more secure in some ways because you know where you are and you're not going to lose the benefit. Whereas if you are on some of the other benefits, it's a bit precarious because if it's judged that you could have got a job or something, you might lose that benefit. And I also, so you've got that, plus the fact that some of the benefit rates are higher, and those two things mean many people are keener to get onto those, if you like, more secure and higher paying benefits, which means there's been a big surge in people seeking them. I think one of the things you see that the government plans will do is to tighten up the rules for new claimants. So even if it can't address some of the people who are already on benefits or work, try and get those people to work, it's stopping the huge number of people that are going on to those benefits as new claimants.
Yeah, it just... I mean, I think one of the biggest issues, having had, spoken to hundreds of people in my career on phone-ins and things about benefits, one of the biggest issues, which never seems to really be addressed, and I think if this was addressed, a lot of people would be prepared to go back to work, and that is that benefits are more secure than a job. And so if you get a job and your benefits are instantly cut, and you go to work and you try this job out and it doesn't work out, you've got to start the whole process of going through those. But meanwhile, your rent needs to be paid, your bills need to be paid. And a lot of people look at that prospect in utter fear. And I get that. You know, it's if I stay on benefits, then at least my rent is paid. I've got a roof over my head. So there should be a more, I know they're talking about, a little bit of, but should be a much more ratcheted approach, a much more, right, for your first month, you'll still get benefits. Right, okay, we will pay you exactly the same benefits, even though you're working, so you can build up your rent for next month. Right,
well,
no
absolutely.
problem. I don't have a problem with that. And then if you say to people, look, if you're out of work again within a year, all of your old benefits will immediately be triggered. You don't have to go through the paperwork again. You don't have to fill in those forms again. You don't have to wait. We will trigger within a year, we will trigger your benefits exactly as they were. And then we'll come back to you and try and organise if you need less or more. If those things were put in place, I promise you, there would be a lot of people who would be prepared to take the risk with work.
That's right, because at the moment, as you say...
Why don't they talk about that?
Yeah, but the risk is, if you'd be giving that up, taking a job that could be on 0 hours contract or very limited, could look good and could earn you more in the long run, but you do that and you give up a secure-ish existence for a precarious existence, and it's just not worth the risk for many people.
No. And I think that would take into account hundreds of thousands of people who do want to work but are too wary of where that will leave their finances. And I I get it. If you've got kids, if you've got a family, you've got rent to pay. Landlords are not particularly forgiving, right? It's got to be paid every single month. And if it isn't, then you start getting the letters, you start getting... Why would you put yourself in that situation?
And
I promise you it would make such a difference.
But it's a really hard one for the government, because they've just about, I wouldn't say they've recovered from it, but we're just about starting to hear less about the winter fuel payments disaster.
Only because
which
it's
was,
not winter anymore.
Exactly, but that was terrible for them. So they're about to embark on yet another area of cuts that will be seen at potentially attacking some of the most vulnerable in society. So while there are many people who would say benefits need reform, probably across all sides of the House, people would say there needs to be reform because the current
but the
system is
reform has to
unsustainable.
Understand why people are locked on benefits, and I don't know why they don't seem to be having that. I never heard that conversation, right? By people saying, now listen, this is a problem. You know, this is a real problem. The reason that people get stuck on benefits is not just because they're lazy, feckless, work shy. It's not that. There is a group that are, but there are other people who are too nervous to get a job.
Yeah, or the illness one that you highlighted with 7 million odd people, or 7.7 million people on the waiting list, the people are waiting for operations.
And maybe it might be a hip operation,
exactly.
It might be something that could very quickly and very easily fix your eyes, you know, even if it's a mental health care. You know, it's hard to blame them for the problems that are, you know, absolutely there with the NHS.
Yeah. But again, it's another huge problem for the government. You know, it just seems to keep coming. Our first was winter fuel, and as you say, it's getting a little bit warmer, so less of a story, and now looking at benefit cuts.
Yeah, well, you know, they're not going to... I don't think they'll get away with it too easily. Right. But they will get away with it, that's the truth. Right, quick break. Vincent and I'll be back in just a moment.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hi there, great to have you with us, and by us I mean Petrie and Vincent Moss, not Price. And we're looking at the papers for Tuesday. The Daily Telegraph, a couple of stories I'd like to look at. Foul play not ruled out about the US oil tanker, which is you and I going, Trump set to lift Ukraine weapons ban as soon as today, because they are being absolutely pelted by Russia at the moment. And the most important thing he can do is actually restore the intelligence.
Yes. Well, he's got to do that, and suggestion is that as these peace talks get underway in the Middle East, that Trump might lift the weapons ban and restore the sort of intelligence advice that the Ukrainians were getting. But it all depends what happens over the next few days. I mean, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, is over there, and the talks are ongoing. I mean, it does look as though, you get the sense that Trump leans towards Putin and hasn't given Ukraine much to play with, and has effectively weakened Ukraine going into these crucial talks.
Well, they're in Saudi Arabia at the moment. Rubio is there. They're really interesting if you look into Rubio, who's now sucking up to Donny, of course. Not that long ago, he was absolutely vehemently against Donald Trump. He said, you've got to watch out for him. He's a dictator in waiting. He's a man that you can't trust. And here he is. Secretary of State. Is he US Secretary of State? Yeah.
Well, a lot of people have changed them.
Sold his soul, hasn't he?
Yeah, well, once he won the presidential contest, yeah, a lot of people had revisited their past thoughts on him, didn't they?
I know, interesting.
Funny that.
Yeah, Vance was another one, wasn't he?
Yes.
So anyway, that's that. Farmers hit again in Rayner land grab. Owners will be forced to sell fields at lower value after the latest attack on rural Britain. What's this? Farmers will be forced to sell fields for less than their potential value if they're seized to build new homes or hospitals on. Great.
Well, I think this is part of... We all know the government wants to build this huge amount, 1.5 million new homes, and is trying to literally bulldoze, if not metaphorically bulldoze, all the things that are in the way of building new homes. Yeah. And one of the things is seen as getting hold of certain bits of land, and there's a suggestion in the Telegraph that the government would pay less, or councils would pay less if they need to compulsory purchase vital bits of land that they see as crucial for infrastructure such as hospitals or schools or potentially even houses, and that farmers and landowners would get less for their land. Now, in reality, I'm not sure that would work in many ways. There'd be huge protests. But this is on the same sort of playbook, if you like, from stories that were around a couple of days ago about if you live near pylons, new pylons, you get £250 because
off your electricity bill.
Exactly.
Except you might not ever sleep again, or whatever the problems are with pylons.
No. But then I thought, where was this going to end? Because if you're in the country and maybe you live next to a sewage works or a pig farm or something like that, I mean, are you going to start giving people discounts for living next to all sorts of inconvenient things? What if you live next to, need a new road, and somebody wants to build a new road, be a bit noisy, you get a discount for that? I mean, it seems a little bit crazy. Either we need these things or we don't. And if you're starting to give people money for things like living next to pylons, I mean, what happens if they live next to airports? I mean,
we're going to be all demanding everything.
Exactly.
But the thing is as well that why should farmers sell their land for cheap to councils who will sell that land to private house builders?
Well, I think the argument would be that they wouldn't, and the councils would develop it for a school or a hospital or...
But councils don't build.
No, that's right. But I think if the land was needed, it could be compulsory purchased at a lower price rather than what would be a very inflated price, because if you're selling land for housing now, it's worth it's worth in the millions, isn't it? So again, it's one of those things, I'm not quite sure how it would work in practice, but it's the government trying to show that it is determined to do things differently when it comes to getting hold of land and getting these big infrastructure projects and housing built. Look
at the compulsory purchases in the past. They've been an absolute clusterfudge, right? On the A40, which is right near me, right? I mean, literally, it's a stone's throw. So you've got the A40, and all the way along the A40 going out of town, all of these houses, thousands of them, at least hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, all compulsory purchased to extend the A40. They were going to put in more lanes. Suddenly that fell apart. So now what's on there? Flats. So they've chucked people out of their homes, left it sitting there rotting for 10, 15 years, and now they've put in the maximum amount of buildings they can put in there, all privately owned, all being sold off privately. So
Yeah, and councils aren't very good at this. I mean,
they're really not very good at it. Look
at
at
all those.
HS2.
I was just going to say HS2, all those compulsory purchases
All
there.
those people chucked out of the house that have been in their family for hundreds of years, thrown out, and now they're not using the land.
And the line won't be built. Oh, well, certainly not built north of the moment, north of Birmingham. So crazy, but it's one of those things. Let's see what happens. I mean, at the end of the day, I can't see huge amounts of cost and purchase happening. If that is true, that's disgusting.
At least pay the right price for it. Right, the Times for Tuesday. Spend billions now to put UK on war footing, Starmer told. Well, we know that that's happening, right? So they're planning to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, so 2 years away, equating to $6 billion a year of extra investment. Well, providing those munitions or whatever are built in this country, then that will be good for the economy, right?
Yes, exactly. And
we just don't buy American weapons.
No, try and get them built here.
Yeah.
But I think the argument being made in the Times from the opposition is that should be happening more, and that the plans to spend 2.5% of GDP by 2027 isn't enough. Trump wants us to spend more, as we know, and various people on the Conservative ranks are saying, yes, we should be spending more, given the situation in Ukraine, threats to Taiwan, and instability in the Middle East. We should be spending far more on things like drones and various modern warfare things. Can't just rely on slow procurement of ships, submarines and fighter jets, which, as we know, take, well, decades really, don't they? So. And
there was some talk about the UK, which is probably about the right size, actually, to have a protective missile dome like the Israelis have as well over the UK, but I suspect that is many years away from now. But it was interesting, wasn't it, that Donald Trump the other day, I mean, does he read a history book? Does he know anything about anything? So he was saying, well, you know, it is with NATO. Do you think if we were in trouble that France, or he couldn't think of another NATO country, so he said another countries that I won't mention because I don't know, would come to our aid? I don't think so. Well, the only time that Article 5 has ever been triggered in NATO's history was for us to go to the aid of the US of A, which we did over 9/11, and we lost 656 people in those wars. And so you've got Vance saying some irrelevant country who hasn't been to war for 30 years, just completely disrespecting what we've done. And then Trump going, well, I don't think they'd come to our aid. But what do you think happened, you absolute lovely man?
Well, exactly.
I've had a new list of swear words that I can't use anymore.
Yeah, and they conveniently forget all of that. And not only that, but even when states isn't at war, a lot of crucial intelligence comes from Europe and the UK and others, which they conveniently forget as well. But to suggest that we wouldn't go to his aid, where the only country that has ever asked to go was, we did. Yeah. I can't bear him. Honestly, every time I see him, I just think, what other absolute load of absolute nonsense. I wish I could use the language that I use off air. Yeah. I would put the point across so much better. Are you talking about? Yeah, well, he just says one thing and then forgets it and then denies he says it a couple of weeks later, doesn't he? Yeah. So that's the time. Again, eco-disaster fears after ships collide. That's the Times is a big story there. The Metro, catastrophe, pollution fear as jet fuel pours out off the Yorkshire coast, but 37 survive North Sea inferno. It's quite extraordinary story, really. When's St Patrick's Day? That's soon, isn't Monday the 17th. Oh, is it? Although if you're going to a party, it's more likely to be happening before that, I think, because it's not on a Monday. Friday, Saturday and Sunday, that's a shame that it's a Monday, isn't it? That's not a bank holiday, is it? It should be. It should be. So that's the Metro. The Daily Star, here we go. We're all talking about the Cheltenham horse race that is coming up, but boffins, psycho scumbag bots in web
takeover, AI kills the net. AI bots will soon take control of the internet and fill it with so much techie gobbledygook that simple humans will no longer be able to understand it.
Well, they're taking over the world, aren't they? I was in a phone shop today and somebody was trying to sell me a new phone that the AI can tell you can point the phone at things and it will tell you what they are, and very clever phones, so it's happening everywhere.
I've got that though, but that's just Google camera. You put a camera over it and it will say, oh yeah, whatever plant, if I'm out.
Ah, right.
If you've got that Google thing, then you've got a camera with it, thing, and you put it over and it tells you what plants.
They sound great. See, my phone's 3 years old, so it doesn't do that yet.
Oh, no, it will be on there. I'll have a look before you leave.
Okay.
Show it to me before you leave. No, it will be on there.
Oh, excellent.
It's so handy, because I'm just really nosy about stuff as well. And plants, if I see nice plants when I'm walking along the road with a dog,
that's good.
just find out what kind of flower.
I'd like to do that with other dogs when you don't know the breed. Can you point at other dogs? Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can. And it'll tell you. It'll come up with all the different versions of it. Psycho bots, there you go. Simple humans will no longer be able to... I don't understand a lot of the internet as it is, to be perfectly fair. And a lot of it I don't want to either. Let's all talk dog. People, the way we talk to our pets, apparently. I bet you talk to Walter all the time, mate.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, me too, with Bailey. Vincent, thank you very much indeed. Vincent Moss, former political editor, thank you. Right, coming up, it's just you and me, and we're talking about what we might consider to be more of a 2-tier, 3-tier, 4-tier justice system than we would ever really want to have. But does somebody's past, should it mitigate them from a sentence, or, you know, cut down a sentence, or even get them off a sentence completely? Because some people are born into horrendous circumstances, and if they weren't born into those circumstances, they might not have become the criminal that they became. Or is it a case of it's the crime? It's the crime, not the person. So whoever commits the crime, it doesn't matter what your background is, you're old enough to know the difference between right and wrong, therefore you are guilty of that crime, and it's the crime that has a sentence, not the person. Give me a call, 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
good morning. It is Petrie here with you until 1 o'clock, and this is your hour. This is a whole hour dedicated to you being able to talk back. And I want to talk to you about the two-tier justice plan, right? And I know this has been knocking about, and we haven't done it before, but the reason I wanted to do it today is because the head of the Sentencing Council today lashed out at critics of a plan changes to guidance to courts that critics claim will create a two-tier system. Well, look, we already have a two-tier system, we know that, and many people of colour will tell you that they've been living with that two-tier system for a very long time, and this is one of the things that has been planned to redress that. But I don't think two wrongs make a right, okay? So it is wrong that somebody of colour will spend longer in prison or be judged more harshly because of his skin colour, and that might be because, or his background, and that might be because the judge just doesn't get it, right, and just thinks, oh, you know, black person, scary. I don't know what they think. I mean, God knows what they think. And so they might be harsher with their sentencing, and that has already created a two-tier system. Many people of colour will tell you exactly that that is the situation. So what this is meant to do is to, in a sense, redress that. But I also think this is wrong, which takes me to my point, two wrongs don't make a right. So basically, it is to look at a pre-sentence report so that a judge, Lord Farquhar, whatever he's called, you know, sitting there just having had port and Stilton for lunch, will understand the perpetrator of the crime a little more. So he gets a pre-sentencing report which might throw into it some mitigating circumstances. So in other words, somebody who was brought up in a housing estate where the gangs run the estate, and the little kid has been bullied since they were 4 or 5 years old, and then they grow up and the only way to protect themselves is to join the gang, and then the gang gets them to do bad stuff, and they do bad stuff not just for protection but for money, and etc, etc, etc. How much of a mitigation should that be? And this pre-sentencing report would normally only considered to be important in certain circumstances, and this is now being expanded to include a young adult, typically 18 to 25, female. So a woman can commit the same crime as a man, and there will be the mitigation of the fact she's female in the pre-sentencing report. I think that is entirely wrong. From an ethnic minority, cultural minority, and or faith minority community, I'm failing to see what difference that could make, unless there's a suggestion that becoming from a minority group means that your life was harder in this country than it is for a white person. Pregnant or postnatal, sole or primary carer for a dependent relative. What's that got to do with if you've broken the law or not? I mean, I get it, right? But it's like when they say mothers shouldn't go to jail for breaking the law, and you think, well, if you're a mother, you should know you shouldn't break the law even more, not break the law, if you know what I mean. Or the court considers that one of the more following may apply to the offender. They've disclosed their transgender. Has or may have any addiction issues. Has or may have a serious chronic medical condition or physical disability or mental ill health, learning disabilities including developmental disorders and neurodiverse conditions, or brain injury and damage. That I understand, but may have a serious chronic medical condition. I've got one of those. Do you reckon I'd get off if I did something really bad? It's worth thinking about, isn't it? Or the court considers that the offender is, or there is a risk that they may have been a victim of domestic abuse, physical or sexual abuse, violent or threatening behaviour, coercive or controlling behaviour, economic abuse, psychological, emotional or any other form of abuse, modern slavery or trafficking, or coercion, grooming, intimidation or exploitation. Some of those I agree with. I do. But I don't agree with all of them. And let's be honest. Let's be really blunt here. The only group that isn't mentioned on here are white men. So they don't automatically get a pre-sentencing report unless they fall into one of those categories as well, right? So there will be mitigation, I suppose. But when you consider that men boys, white boys from poorer backgrounds, are the least well educated in this country, then everybody deserves mitigation, right? Or is it the case, we're always being told, aren't we, oh, look, this person had a terrible childhood, therefore they can't really be blamed for what they do in adulthood. I'm not sure I buy that either. It's very, very difficult. Is it the crime or is it the person? What mitigations should, in your view, be accepted when it comes to sentencing somebody? Is there anything that you think, no, hang on a minute, that's right. That, look, if you are somebody who's had X, Y, Z, then you deserve mitigation and you deserve a lesser sentence. But the truth is that if you commit a crime, the victim is still the same victim, right? They know a victim of rape or mugging or stabbing or whatever, it's not less of a rape because there were mitigating circumstances. It's not less of a stabbing because that person is from an ethnic minority. Do you see what I mean? We're forgetting the victim here. The victim doesn't know about mitigating circumstances. You know, they're not stabbed and somebody say, I'm sorry about that, bruv, I had a really difficult childhood, right? They're still stabbed. So listen, give me a call. Let me know what you think about this. I do think there are some things that should be mitigating circumstances, but I think that the list is just getting too long now. And I don't think that that is fair, that two people who look different can commit the same crime and one be treated more harshly than the other, except to note that that is already happening, but the other way round. Give me a call. 0344 499 1000. You can send me a message as well. I'll read them out. Text the word talk and your message to 87222. Right, let's go to the phones. And Baz is on the line from Hull. Hello, Baz.
Hi, Petrie.
How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. Yourself?
Good, yeah, not bad for a Monday, or Tuesday it is now. So listen, Baz, should background be a mitigating circumstance when it comes to a crime?
No, it shouldn't be. And I don't believe for a second it should be a mitigating circumstance because, you know, like you said, and this is a point, you know, this is the biggest point. If you're a victim of a crime, you don't care what that person's childhood was like. You know, if my wallet gets stolen, I'm not really bothered if they've had a rubbish childhood or if they've had a brilliant childhood. But if people want to use past experiences or mitigating circumstances to try and get out of prison sentences, there'd be no one in prison. You could go around in circles and you'd be going on for millennia. Oh, well, this happened. Oh, well, my dog died last month. Oh, well, the weight got put up. You know, you could make all these different excuses and you could just go on forever. The victim still suffers the same effects of the crime regardless of childhood. And there's people who have had awful childhood, people who've been, you know, victims of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and they haven't gone on to commit crime that's risen above the circumstances. So it shouldn't matter what happened a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. If someone's committed a crime, they need to be given a punishment. They need to be given a punishment what reflects the crime. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how, you know, things have been in the past. If they've done a crime, they need to be punished for crime. It doesn't matter who it is.
It's interesting because we do have the, you know, an age at which criminal responsibility, you basically they say it's 10 years old that you know the difference between right and wrong. So we all know the difference between right and wrong. And certainly we should, right, by that age. But do you not think that in some cases that I keep coming back to thinking, look, there are some people who, you know, would not have turned to a life of crime had it not been for, you know, certain circumstances in their life?
It's possible, but for the most part, I do believe it is a lousy excuse.
Yeah.
I believe there's always an opportunity for change. If there's an opportunity for change or to rise above your circumstances, change it, go for it. You know, I'm not saying it is possible for everyone, but we cannot excuse the inexcusable.
Yeah, and it feels like we're just kind of building up excuses for people, isn't it? What about somebody who has an addiction issue? This is also on the list to be looked at for mitigation.
But the thing with an addiction is that if they're in prison, they're going to come off that. Well, hopefully they're going to come off that drug or the alcohol somehow. But also, even if they've become completely addicted to a drug, they chose to try it in the first place. That was their choice. They chose to take it in the first place. Once you're addicted, you're hooked. But you make the choice to try it for the first time. You are fully compos mentis at that point.
And so, is there anything that you believe should be used in mitigation? If somebody was up before a judge, like you and I have said, and I think this has been entirely forgotten in the conversation, the victim doesn't care, right? If you're a victim, you're a victim. It's no less of a rape just because the person had a rotten childhood, right? So you're still a victim of that. But is there anything that you can think of in your past, in somebody's past, that would in some way excuse their current behaviour?
I suppose if someone has been, if someone's been coercively controlled for, 10 years or 20 years, and that person's, been sexually abusive, physically abusive, and, they lash out at them and they hit them, or maybe they even kill them, I still think that, I don't know with that one, because you could, if you start giving excuses to people killing their abusers, you're then, sorry, I'm struggling to get my words out a bit. If if you've decided you don't like your husband because he cheated on you, you could kill your husband and then say, oh well, he was coercively abusive to me for 10 years, even if he isn't. If we start using that as mitigation, there'll be a load of people, there'll be a surge in people who are claiming to be victims of that, and the real victims of coercive control will be left behind.
And what about the fact that they're saying that if you're female, I mean, again, I think that is so wrong to say that women who commit the same crime shouldn't suffer the same sentence.
I think that's pathetic. If women want I believe women should have equal rights. Definitely, women should have the right to vote. Women should have the right to minimum wage. But in the same breath, if they've got those things, they should have to face the same punishment.
I agree. I completely agree with that. That's equality, right? That's what it looks like.
Equality. I believe in gender equality. You do have some people who unfortunately say, "Oh, I want gender equality," but what they really want is a special treatment.
Yeah, but which is not equality.
No.
And that's not what it's about. It's to be considered equal to, not better than.
Exactly.
And most of the feminists that I know completely agree with that. They don't want to be above men. They just want to be treated the same. And that's the situation. It is interesting though, isn't it? When you look at the situation as it is at the moment, there will be people of colour who are listening who will say, well, there's already a two-tier system. It is beyond doubt that judges will be harsher to, a black offender than they are to a white offender, probably because they recognise themselves, perhaps, more in the white offender. So there will be people who say, no, hang on a minute, it's already a two-tier system. That, we do go to prison for longer if we're of colour. So how do we rectify that without?
Very simple. How we rectify that is we need to have stricter rules on if you've committed a crime. There needs to be like a constitution of crimes. So, for example, if you've committed assault, you get 2 years in prison. If you've murdered someone, you get 25 years in prison. Those are just examples. It has to be, regardless of age, gender, what skin colour you are. If you've committed that crime, it will match the certain thing. Like, for example, if you park on double yellow lines and say the standard fee is £25, they won't charge you £50 if you're black, or if you're a woman, they'll charge you the same amount.
Very smart, Baz. That's very true. That's true. So there are certain things where we know there's no question, so we don't even question it. And I think that there is, it seems as if too much variation, doesn't there, in sentencing at the moment, and too many different things that judges can use. And if it was just straight down the line, we'd all know what we were facing, and there wouldn't be any mitigation for anybody.
And if people knew as well that there was going to be a strict punishment for, serious crimes, I think that will prevent people. But also as well, people nowadays, I don't think people nowadays really fear prison, because, people know if they go inside prison, they'll get 3 meals a day, they'll probably get a telly, they'll get phone calls, they'll get a kettle. There's people in prison who are better than pensioners, and that is so wrong. That is so wrong with society. If you've committed an awful crime, why should you have the luxury of watching TV? It's not a right. It's not a right. It's a privilege.
Yeah, well, they do it, don't they, to keep them calm, because they can't control the prisons because there's not enough prison guards. It's all interconnected, and I think this is what this new sentencing guidelines are about. It's about keeping people out of prison rather than putting them in prison. Baz, that was a great call. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Lots to think about there. Thank you. Right, I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'll be talking to Jay.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side.
Good morning. This is Talk, and it's Petrie here with you until 1 o'clock, and we are talking at the moment about two-tier justice system. Now we've heard about the two-tier policing system. Apparently you're not allowed to say that anymore, but Keir Starmer's going to try and make that. I don't know if it's illegal or not to say it. I don't know, but apparently you're not allowed to say it. But two-tier policing, two-tier policing, two-tier policing. I said it. But now we're talking about a two-tier justice system. And this is the head of the Sentencing Council today has lashed out at critics of planned changes to guidance to courts that critics claim will create a two-tier system. It's basically white men and everybody else. is the system, it would seem. Labour has said it will seek to block the changes. So have the Tories. Nobody's happy about this, believe me when I say that. But this body, the Sentencing Council, are independent, or is independent. It is not. It can't be interfered with by our politicians. So something would have to change in order to change this. And he's telling politicians to back off, that nothing can be done. However, he said that this needs to be done to redress what has been a problem already, and that is that judges, who usually come from a rarefied group of people, we have an image, don't we, of the old geezer, a bit pompous, you know, probably never spent a day in his life in poverty. We have that image of a judge who is completely out of touch, and there isn't enough diversity in the judicial world. And so what this sentencing guidance is supposed to do is to educate these judges who have no clue what's going on in the real world, not all of them, but some of them, as to what mitigation there might be, as to different backgrounds of people, different skin colour, different religion, different things that may have contributed to the crime or the perpetrator in front of them, the guilty person. Right? So these pre-sentencing reports are not unusual and have certainly been used before for mitigation, but the list has been extended now to include other groups who will get an automatic right to a pre-sentencing report. So women, which I think is completely wrong, if you're from an ethnic minority, a cultural minority, and or faith minority, a sole or primary carer for a dependent relative, have you disclosed your transgender? I mean, that everyone can do that, right? Has or may have had any addiction issues. Well, if you're no longer addicted, I don't know how that could play into what you've just done to break the law. So look, the list is it's a non-exhaustive list. So in other words, this list can go on and on and on. But those are the things I've got in front of me, and I think it seems to be unfair that justice is supposed to be blind, right? That's why Lady Justice, with her scales of justice, has got a blindfold on. Is because it shouldn't matter what you look like. You should all be treated the same, except that people are already treated differently for how they look. People are already treated differently from what background they come from. We know that. Rich people very rarely go to jail, okay? They just don't. They can do their stuff, they can, whatever they do, but they're treated much more leniently. And because they speak the same language perhaps as the judge, and that's the point. These pre-sentencing reports are supposed to educate the judge to say, now listen, you pompous old fart, here is what this person has potentially been through, and therefore, you know, maybe that's a mitigation when it comes to how you sentence this person. So that's the point of it. But is it fair? And I don't see why being a female should be any mitigation at all. I mean, you know right from wrong. You commit a crime. Like I said to Baz, the victim doesn't care what your background was. They don't care if you had a rotten childhood. You know, if somebody's attacked or mugged or raped, the crime has still happened to them, and it's the crime that needs to be punished, isn't it? So should it matter? I mean, certainly, you know, if you're a rape victim and they say, well, you know, he had a difficult upbringing, you're going to go, I literally don't care. That happened to me. It is a crime that happened to me. Therefore, I don't see any mitigation in that. So, should there ever be mitigation? When, like I've just said, the victim's still the victim. They don't care. It doesn't make any difference to them. They've still been attacked. Jay is in Essex. Hello, Jay. How are you?
Oh, morning, Petrie. I'm fine, thank you.
Good.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. What do you make of this?
Oh, God, it's like everything at the moment. It's a slippery road to no justice at all. They've already got the opportunity to do these pre-sentence reports, so why do they have to change it? Why do these unelected people think they know best? Basically, they're going to stir up so many anomalies of, well, you know, they can get them off on this and they can get them off on that. You said women are on the list. Well, supposing they identify as a woman on that particular day. Yeah. It's just ridiculous. Then why don't they just leave the rules alone? 40 years ago, the law was the law. if you killed somebody, you went inside for life, and you did life. You didn't do 40% of your sentence. If you raped somebody, you had a hard time. If you touched a kiddie, my God, the other inmates went for you and made your life hell. Now they're trying to dumb down everything and give everybody an excuse for everything. And it can't work. You can't have law and order like that.
Do you think there's ever an excuse for criminal behaviour?
No, not really, because it is a crime, and that's what you're tried for. There are obviously odd occasions where something terrible has happened, but they've already got the right now to do a pre-sentence report.
Yes, they do. They can request it. Your defence lawyers can request it.
Yeah, you can't make the laws to cover every single odd thing that might happen in the future.
Yeah.
But where they've put on there, like, culture and the faith, I know they were saying today that 23% of the sex crimes committed in this country particularly, are committed by people that weren't born here.
Well, do you know what? Actually, that number is 15%.
Oh, they were saying 23%.
Yeah, they will say 25% because the 15%, and then there's 8% of people whose nationalities couldn't be identified. So it doesn't, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're foreign.
Well, they are, obviously, otherwise they'd be able to identify.
Oh, no, not necessarily.
But the point is, it's not just this country, it's all Europe, it's the same, all the sex crimes, the rapes, the sexual assaults.
But even if it was 25%, that means that 75% are committed by people who are not foreigners.
Yeah, but
that doesn't make such an interesting headline, does it?
But by the numbers it does. But because they've put that on that list of faith and culture, is it Bangladesh where they've now made it legal to marry 9-year-old girls? So you're going to get some hot sort of like shot lawyer that says, well, he came from Bangladesh and it's legal in his country. He wasn't aware it wasn't here. And the lawyers are going to have a field day. They're going to tie the courts up for years to come. And there's no need to alter it. They've already got the opportunity to do the pre-sentence reports. We just need the law to be the law.
Do you think there's too much confusion in the law and in sentencing, and this ability to sort of pick and choose by a judge what people get, as opposed to sticking to what, you know, a fast and firm sentence?
Yeah, I mean, we've had some terrible cases, haven't we? With the 3 people in Nottingham, with that big bloke that was not taking his pills by choice. There was someone else that didn't like needles, so they stopped taking their medication. You can make any sort of excuses, can't you, why they did something, but if they do something so horrendous, it doesn't matter why they did it. They're lucky not to have been sort of here in, 50 years ago. They'd have been hung. The sentences now are just so much softer, and it's like, oh, you can find an excuse for everybody if you look deep enough, can't you?
I think you can. I do think that everybody has probably got a story, and that can be used in some form of mitigation. I mean, one of the things on the list was a chronic disease. You has or may have a serious chronic medical condition. Well,
Really?
I've got one of those, so it means that I'd have some sort of mitigation.
Oh, well, let's just sort of shut the courts down and we'll have a Mad Max sort of period.
Yes.
While everyone just fights it out, the stronger people...
That wasn't Mad Max. What is it? I'll ask the guys.
And none of us survive.
Oh, Sam, sorry, I'm just going to talk to my... he knows. Or Johnny, actually, both of them know. What is the film where there's a day where everybody can just go out and commit a crime? Purge. The Purge. There you go.
Oh, I don't know that one.
The Purge. It's the same. Yeah, it's sort of like that dystopian thing where you're allowed to go out and do whatever you want, but then everybody gets murdered. It's probably not your sort of film, Jay, I would say.
No, but the younger people don't fight anything anymore, and they accept it. But when you're older, you remember how things used to be, Petrie. You could walk the streets, you could pop round your friends of a night and walk home and not be looking over your shoulder and not have an alarm in your hand. waiting for something to happen.
Or a police officer to approach you.
Yeah, you know, but because we remember that, we're not wrong by saying, you know, just leave things as they are. Stop downgrading everything. They're lowering the bar to such an extent that they'll have mitigating circumstances for everyone, unless you're white and male.
Yeah, well, that certainly seems to be the case. It does seem to be the case. But then, like I said to Baz as well, at the moment, if you are a person of colour, you are likely to get a tougher sentence because the judge doesn't understand or is choosing to give people of colour a harsher sentence. Because they've probably never met a black person before, right?
I wouldn't actually sort of like agree with that, because the rioters last year got the harshest sentence possible, and they were all whites.
Yes, I know, but when it comes to the number of people of colour who are in prison and the ones that get the longer sentences for the same crime as white people, all the facts and stuff are out there, and they are treated more harshly. So this is meant to rebalance that, but I also, like I said before, two wrongs don't make a right.
No, it's bounced too far the other way now, hasn't it? But who elects these people, Petrie?
Hey?
Who elects these judges and this group?
Well, they just turn up, don't they, after a port and...
Can I turn up then after a port and Stilton?
Port and I love Port and Stilton as well.
They just need people with a brain.
What they need to do is have more diversity in the chambers.
But they can't say that they'll take no notice of the government, because if they all suddenly then decided, let's kill everybody that's white, or let's make everyone that's over 50 kill themselves, or, you know, they've only got so much power. So what gives them that amount of power that they can ignore the government?
Because they're an independent body, and it has been designed so that government can't give sentences for political opponents or things like that, so they can't decide that somebody should be, you know, put to prison just for saying, I think that Keir Starmer's an idiot, right? So it was designed specifically with that in mind, and I don't have a problem with that.
If they get power crazy and start making silly decisions, like I say, everyone over 50 has got to die because we can't afford to look after them, who can then sort of stop them?
Yeah, but it's they only make a decision on sentencing, so they'll decide.
At the moment.
they'll decide if a sentence is if it's too lenient, and we complain about it or whatever, and they decide the sentence for the crime. But yeah, no, I do take your point. I mean, it does seem to be. I like the fact that the government shouldn't be making those decisions, because I don't trust them. But Jay, brilliant to talk to you as ever. Thank you very much indeed. I've got to go to a break, but I'll be back in just a moment.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning. It's Petrie here with you, and we are talking about a two-tier justice system, which is what the head of the Sentencing Council today is being accused of creating. Lord Justice William Davis said that any suggestion to guidelines for judges would give preferential treatment to minority groups was completely wrong after a backlash by Labour ministers and right-wing politicians. So everybody's against these changes. Everybody thinks that it is unfair, and everybody thinks it'll create a two-tier system. However, what Lord Justice William Davis is suggesting is that it is already a two-tier system. I happen to think it's more than two tiers, but that people of colour are treated more harshly because judges don't understand them. They don't get it. They don't know people like the ones standing in front of them. So they tend to be harsher. But I don't think that this list is going to make that any. It's just two wrongs, isn't it? It's wrong to sentence people of colour for longer, just as much as it is wrong to let people of colour have a mitigation on that basis to reduce their sentence. So it is just wrong. Two wrongs don't make a right. It doesn't work. But I'm wondering if there's anything that you think should be in mitigation, because I keep coming back to this central point, and that is the victim. The victims are always forgotten in our justice system. Always. Victim. Remember, for every criminal there is a victim. So all the victims are forgotten. The victim doesn't care. Didn't make the rape any less rapey just because the person who did it had a terrible childhood or is from a culturally different background. The victim in this is still the victim. The crime has still been the crime. So how do we square that circle? How do we say to a victim, we're sort of downplaying your rape because the person was from a culturally different background? Not something that would be acceptable, you would think, except that that's what's being suggested. So is it that this is just to even the playing field, or is it two-tier? Is it different? Because the judges don't have to take into account any mitigation. They don't. When they're looking at sentencing, they can say, look, I've read the mitigating circumstances. I don't think they've got anything to do with this particular crime. Therefore, I'm not giving any discount on the basis of those mitigating circumstances. We've heard judges say that. It's certainly happened for years, and so mitigation doesn't always lead to a lesser sentence. But should it ever, I suppose, is the question. And what mitigations would you accept if a crime had happened to you to sort of justify the crime that had happened, in a sense, to excuse it in a way? Let's go to Andrew, who's in Bristol. Good morning, Andrew.
Yeah, very good morning to you, Petrie. Thanks for taking the call.
You're welcome.
Great show as usual. We have problems with our judiciary at the moment, and you brought them up in a very positive way. We cannot have two-tier justice, but that seems to be exactly what we've got.
We have, definitely, and have had for decades.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we've got people who come from other cultures who claim that because they come from other cultures, raping somebody is absolutely fine.
Where it probably isn't in their own culture, to be fair.
Well, yeah, that may be the case, but we can't handle that, and we can't have judges coming in and saying, yeah, we'll reduce your sentence simply because...
you didn't quite understand what the law was.
Well, that exactly is it.
Yeah.
You didn't understand what our law was. Your culture is different from ours, and why should you get away with raping somebody who is over here? And, I just just don't understand why they really get away with this. It's not fair to us or the person who's the victim. And it seems more and more likely that the victim is the one that gets the blame, or the one that people are getting at simply because some judge has said, sorry, the guy who raped you didn't understand that he was doing wrong.
Yeah, no, I get it. But then there have been judges in the past, I don't know if you remember Judge Pickles, who once said in a sentencing hearing that the young woman shouldn't have been wearing a short skirt. I mean, that was some years ago, but it was victim blaming, and it was seen as such at the time, although it was quite regular at the time to blame the victims of sexual assault. So this is to, I suppose, in a way, to educate judges that the world isn't as they see it. It isn't going to their gentleman's club or whatever it is. They are largely still white
Absolutely
men.
Right. They're a law unto themselves.
Yeah. They're a rarefied bunch, right? They live in a different time sphere to the rest of us, I think. I mean, hopefully that is changing, and hopefully as we get more people of colour coming through the system and ending up on the bench, we will see a fairer system. We will see somebody who doesn't sentence somebody who's got different coloured skin differently just because they don't, that it's something, you know, rare to them, that we will see a more evenness applied across the system, you would hope.
Well, absolutely right. I mean, we don't vote for these people.
No. But I do think it's wrong to treat women differently.
Oh, absolutely. I mean...
If it's the same crime exactly, like, you know, a woman stabs somebody, a man stabs somebody, and they're both up in front of a judge, and the judge is more lenient on the woman, that's not right, because the crime, I keep coming back to this, the crime is still the same, the victim is still the same, right?
Well, this latest news that we've had, that there's going to be different aspects of sentencing because you're one of the minorities, or because of your sex, or because of anything other than that. We can't have that. Everything should be equal under the law.
But are we all equal? Are we all equal?
To everybody here. And should be applied to everybody equally here.
It should be, yeah. But there will be some cases, of course, a lot of cases, I would suggest, where if a child had had a different upbringing, they may not have turned into criminals.
Well, okay, yeah. Everybody should know right from wrong by the time they're about, let's say, 14 or 15.
Yeah.
You know, and if you don't know right from wrong, then devil take the hindmost. You should be responsible for everything that you do. And whether that's raping somebody or whether that's carrying a knife or a machete around the streets of London, it makes no difference. It should be equal to everybody. Wrong is wrong and right is right. And we all know the reasons these things are done. It's to make people feel that they're being done. I use that term in a strange way, but it's not a fair. It's not a fair thing at the moment. The judiciary, as you say, they live in a different world, and really they should be voted on basically either by Parliament, if you can trust Parliament these days, which nobody seems to be.
But they should be laymen, right? They should, they should be lawyers. Of course, they've got to understand the law in order to reside over it. But also, there needs to be. You know, people keep going, oh, we hate diversity and inclusion and things, but this is where it really matters that there's a diverse judiciary, because the people in front of them are diverse. We have a diverse country. Therefore, we do need a diverse judiciary.
Well, I agree with you there. I'm not suggesting that all the judges need to be white-skinned, for example.
No.
Otherwise, the people that aren't white-skinned are going to say, "No way, this isn't fair."
Well, and that is what has been happening. Is that a lot of judges, will sentence a black guy and a white guy for the same crime in a different way, and that's not fair either. So
yeah, true. I don't agree with that. Whoever's done wrong should be sentenced to a degree that is set by the law.
Yeah, and it's the crime, isn't it? Not the person.
It's the crime and not the person.
Yeah.
We need to flatten things out and say, this is what you will get if you do this, and this is the minimum you will get if you do this. Other than that, I'm quite agreeable to what they say.
Yeah, I think you've said exactly what others have said this morning on this phone in, and it's just too complicated at the moment. There's just no even playing field, and this complicates things even further. Brilliant to talk to you, Andrew. Thank you very much indeed. Listen, I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'll be talking to Robert.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hi there, good morning. This is Talk, and it's Petrie here. For the next sort of 8 minutes, that's what's left on the programme, and we're talking about the head of the Sentencing Council has today lashed out at critics of planned changes to guidance to courts that those critics claim will create a two-tier system. We've already got a two-tier system. We know that. We know that. It's a multi-tiered system. We know that certain people get banged up where other people don't. We know that if you're a Labour MP and you punch somebody in the face, you're not going to go into prison for very long. And you're going to get paid while you're in prison. But if that was you or me, and we'd done that, we would be going down for much longer than that, I can promise you that. So we already know there's a two-tier system. Rich people don't tend to go to jail, and if they do, it's an open all these things. So we know that there already is one. And that people of colour are more likely to serve longer sentences than people who are white. So this is sentencing, this pre-sentence report set to educate judges on people and backgrounds and things that they may not understand. So that might be mitigation when it comes to sentencing. The judge doesn't have to do it, and often they won't. And we often hear, I've seen the mitigation, I don't believe that applies in this case. So it wouldn't be acceptable. I think the killers of that little girl, remember her mum and dad, who have gone down, they tried to mitigate it by saying that they were just issuing, you know, standard punishment, but clearly they weren't, and the judge ignored that and said, look, culturally this doesn't make any difference. Beating a child to death is still beating a child to death, wherever you are. So they don't have to take it into account, but they can, and therefore it is deemed that they will pass fairer sentences on those people, given that there are mitigating circumstances. The thing is that the list is getting longer and longer of people who are entitled to these pre-sentencing reports. That your brief can ask for one if they believe there are mitigation circumstances in your crime, but they're not always done. They take too long, they're expensive, yada yada yada. So some people won't get them, some people won't be offered them, and other people will, by dint of just their skin colour or their religion or their gender, be entitled to one straight away without even thinking about it. So I've been asking really if this is just watering down the system, or whether you think in some cases there can be mitigating circumstances. Look, I keep coming back to this one point: a victim's still a victim. They don't care. They have been assaulted. There's something has happened to them. The person who did it, it doesn't matter to them if they had a rotten childhood or not. And the victim should be considered the most important person in the justice system, I believe. Anyway, let's talk to Robert. Robert, good morning.
Good morning, Petrie. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Well, yeah, not the best of weeks or fortnights. I got diagnosed with heart failure a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, Robert.
Yeah, but on a lighter note, I'll give my membership card up, for Reform today, so that cheered me up. I left Reform. They can keep the 25 quid and have it on me. I'm disgusted with them.
Really?
Yeah, I'm really disappointed, just like Tories. You know, anyway,
I mean, do you know what, Robert? They're all the blooming same.
Yeah, on going back to what he was saying,
yeah.
Like my love for you, justice should be blind.
You mean you just listened to me on the radio? Is that what you're saying?
and I'm talking about, you know, when I first met you, or when I first spoke to you, I did tell you that my dad was a professional criminal. I was brought up in that environment, but I never went on to be a criminal. In actual fact, my dad was very strict with me. So what you've got then, you've got a 25-year-old just been done for child grooming, but it's okay because his dad's doing 15 years for it as well. And the religion that I follow, you know, my prophet married an 8-year-old, so that's okay then. No. Like, you know, justice should be blind. Yeah, there should be mitigating circumstances. Of course there should, but it will be taken advantage of. It will be taken advantage of. What's happened with the judicial system, it should be like in America where they're voted. They're voted in.
Yeah, it's so tricky for me, this, because to say it should be blind is to accept that it is blind right now. And I don't think it is blind right now.
But what I don't accept, that people of colour have got the monopoly of being done by the police. I mean, I've been brought up all my life. I'll just tell you quickly, I got married in 1973, had a big wedding. And in them days, you didn't have a wedding present list, so we got loads and loads of doubles and trebles. Lo and behold, the flying squad give my dad a spin one day and nicked all my wedding presents. Seriously, nicked them all.
Thinking that your dad had nicked them?
Well, yeah. No, well, they probably was stolen. No, but what I'm saying is, you know, all my dad said was it's an occupational hazard.
Yeah.
You know, so people of colour are not the only people who've, you know, and I wasn't a criminal. I was just the son of a criminal.
And do you think it would have been so easy for you to follow in your old man's footsteps, but you knew right from wrong? Or did he taught you right from wrong? He said, look, don't do what I do.
My dad was very strict with me. I wasn't allowed to smash milk bottles and smash windows because I wasn't allowed to bring the police around my house because it was full up with stolen gear. No, I know it's funny, but it's true.
It is funny. It is funny. So unwittingly, your dad put you on the straight and narrow because he didn't want to be caught.
He was very strict with me, my dad, very strict.
And so do you look at that then and go, well, look, if I could have been a criminal, but I didn't, so other people know the difference between right and wrong as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, especially in really serious cases. I mean, I've never been nicked in my life. If I would have been nicked, I would never have stood up in court and gone, well, my dad was a criminal. I would never have even thought of doing that.
But your brief might say, look, we can use that as mitigation to get you a lower sentence. You'd be mad not to, wouldn't you?
Well, maybe. But you're talking about much more serious cases. What I'm trying to say is people of colour have not got the monopoly of being hard done by the police. The difference was, in my dad's day, that was all crooked. And my dad used to say, thank God for crooked police, because I'll be doing a lot more bird. I can say that now because everybody can.
Everybody's gone. Yeah, no, you can say that anyway because you haven't named a specific police officer. So you can say what you like in terms of the law. But is there ever a mitigating circumstance? Bear in mind that my belief is that the victim is always the most important person in the justice system, and they don't care. The crime has already been done against them, right? Or they've been mugged or whatever. It doesn't make any difference to them what mitigating circumstances there might be. Do you think there ever is a mitigating circumstance?
Yes. I think there is.